the sun is shining outside. As we see one of the school academies where students are coming out with happy faces, they realize that everything they were doing took too long. They had fun, joking with each other about how they just randomly put answers to questions and mostly stared. But at that moment, they didn't notice military vehicles passing by their school. They called those people not real adventurers, just students from one of the specialized schools. However, once they looked at the emblems, they noticed these people were from the Warrior Academy. What happened next was a terrifying incident that plunged the world into chaos. It began without warning or hint, as portals opened up and dragons along with various creatures surged forth. One dragon was so massive that people couldn't close their mouths in shock. By that time, science had proven that there exists a world in the universe similar to Earth, and on this planet, a terrible event had shattered it to its tiniest bits. As a result, fragments began to be attracted to Earth, and on that day, parts of their world began merging with ours. A gigantic tree grew in the middle of Earth, and this phenomenon was called the adhesion phenomenon. Thus, strange laws of nature and a variety of monsters appeared, including the multi-headed Hydra and the tsunamis they caused. Only about 17% of the Earth's area was affected, and humans lost control as dangerous zones emerged. They eventually named these areas dungeons, home to monsters like the Horned Dread, whose power grew with their numbers. This day marked a turning point. Bullets couldn't hurt them anymore, and the soldiers were taken down in one swift move. Humans were unprepared to face these monsters, lacking the skills or methods to deal with them, but they were lucky because the disaster wasn't the only challenge. A natural limitation that humans faced suddenly vanished, and the potential limitations imposed by Earth's natural laws were completely obliterated. People grew so strong they could confront the monsters, their strength increasing by the second. Many were able to counter these monsters. Although every awakened ability varied from person to person, those deemed chosen decided to train, and many who embraced their newfound powers formed agencies dedicated to regaining control over the dungeons. These agencies came to be known as adventurers. It was from this moment that the era of dungeons began, where people fought against monsters, also dubbed the Adventurers' Age. The entire world praised their achievements as they inspired everyone with their strength. After these events, organizations popped up globally to train adventurers. The best training center for teens in the Republic of Korea, producing top adventurers for the last 25 years, was the world-famous Warrior High School. At this point, as we learn about this whole saga, we see students still chatting about it, saying that everyone treats what happens in the dungeon like a test because they've already received permission to do so. They weren't even afraid they might die. They were overly confident in themselves, and there was a reason they were accepted to this school. As soon as the students finished discussing, all the classmates, especially the girls nearby, began shouting about someone being incredibly handsome. Before our eyes stood a half-blood elf, causing quite the stir because no one could understand how he could attract so much attention. A shorter classmate chimed in, saying that this particular half-elf often appeared on television. His name was Daewoo Choi. His father was a famous ranker and his mother an elf. Many believed the half-elf would surely rise to great heights. Some even bet that he'd join the ranks of the top adventurers upon graduation. At just 17 years old, with white hair and light eyes, his rank was senior soldier, and he had returned from the dungeon 14 times. A boy watching with envy didn't like that the half-elf was garnering so much attention, but secretly hoped they weren't mad at him. This thought only made the big guy angrier. Meanwhile, the bespectacled friend asked if our hero was working again today. The main character replied affirmatively, which sparked sympathy, but he hoped his friends would have a blast without him. The muscular guy questioned why he was still working post-exam, suggesting skipping work and joining them, but as soon as he said that, his bespectacled friend jabbed him in the stomach, signaling that you can't skip work, especially for our hero. By this time, our hero had already said goodbye to them. While Brawny was lying on the ground, our hero had moved on. The bespectacled friend told Brawny to be gentler next time before discussing their situation. It was revealed that Yaeng's grandfather or father was still in the hospital. It was unclear which. However, he had been notified countless times about unpaid hospital bills from Angel, an exorbitant amount. He also received messages from his boss demanding a prosthesis and asking him to meet because he had work. At that moment, the half-elf waved goodbye, turning to our hero so abruptly that even his classmates thought something strange had occurred. Did our hero do something to him? But it was nothing. The half-elf probably just imagined it. At this point, Yang had already walked far enough. He didn't want to work, but he had no other choice since he desperately needed money. He arrived at some ruins that resembled an abandoned subway station, and there his boss finally noticed him, instructing him to say hi to their client. His boss's name was I Am Yuan. He was 37, a broker with ash-gray hair, and apparently had a passion for smoking. Our hero, Yi Yan, took out his earpiece and introduced himself, saying it was nice to meet everyone, and that he was ready to work, but, as often happens, their client wasn't satisfied. He started shouting that he wanted them to find a much better employee. Now, there was a short, bald man standing in front of him. The broker said they were already looking at the best employee he could find, but the bald man didn't buy it at all. He told Yi Yan to listen because he was there to make sure some idiot, like the guy sitting and smoking, didn't deceive him. The broker, confused, thought the bald man was being pretty harsh, but the bald man kept insisting Yi Yan should get the incompetent smuggler out of his sight, and that they needed someone who really knew their stuff, otherwise, they'd both regret it. Despite all of Yi Yan's attempts to reason with him, the bald man, who was beefy and intimidating, asked if the guy behind him was really an adventurer and why he stood behind such an old man. This sparked a wave of aggression from Lai Pailu, the muscle-bound thug, who was 34 and had returned to the silver rank of adventurer, boasting about having visited the dungeon 81 times. The bald man ordered Yi Yan to kneel and beg for mercy, implying he had to teach him a lesson. As the bald man kept shouting, Yi Yan eyed his boss, who was calmly puffing away on his cigarette. Knowing it was time to act, Yi Yan started to mock him. He claimed he wasn't afraid at all, but admitted he didn't know how to beg for mercy. Standing tall, our hero, Yuya Reo, 17 years old, was a smuggler from the first-year training at the Donking Dungeon. He had illegally returned from dungeons 371 times. Many may wonder who these smugglers are. They are the lowlifes who threaten the world. Smuggling in a dungeon? Well, adventurers put in a lot of hard work to explore dungeons and take down monsters to claim treasures. But before they leave the dungeon, these treasures have to be checked because some can be incredibly powerful. If these powerful items were distributed without oversight, they could be used for evil, endangering lives. That's why the Adventurers Association insists on verifying and registering treasures before taxing them based on their value. Some scummy folks lure adventurers into avoiding these hefty taxes, pocketing the loot instead. If anyone spots these shady characters, they need to report them quickly to the association. The bald man approached the broker, questioning if he would really let this happen. The broker couldn't help but laugh at the bald man, thinking he was just being ridiculous. The bald man accused the broker of being scared and pointed out that the smuggler had a bad attitude. He reminded everyone that the reason for the bully's past resignation wasn't injuries but was an attack on a teammate. The broker thought he could take it easy with Jiren, the bully, but he was sorely mistaken. If things went south, they might end up with the corpse of a young boy who was too bold for his own good. Yi Yan, meanwhile, warmed up, considering the bully's past aggression just frivolous. After all, he saw the big guy as the real criminal. With anger almost bursting from him, the thug thought it would be easy to take care of someone like Yi Yan. When Jiren heard this, the showdown began. Yi Yan openly mocked the bully, believing he knew he needed to dispose of the trash. The bald guy was shocked, and even Karaga thought Yi Yan was a genuine psycho. The thug didn't hesitate long and threw a punch at Yi Yan, who easily dodged it, stating that attacking him out of the blue was plain rude. The bully ramped up his aggression, growing angrier, but Yi Yan simply kicked him lightly, saying that a little kick in the rear would sort things out. As the broker watched, the bald man was left in disbelief, unable to process what he was witnessing. The broker explained that he had invited the most experienced person he knew. Meanwhile, Yi Yan, who was enjoying himself, remarked that this was all unexpected based on looks. He thought the bully would be way stronger than what he was seeing now. Li Pailu, too, was confused. He still thought of the teenage smuggler as just a kid, but all of Yi Yan's reflexes and the strength of his punch proved comparable to a pro. The broker noticed and remarked that the bully began to understand this wasn't a fight he could take lightly. The bald man shouted at the broker to keep an eye on the match, because the muscular guy could still win, but the broker saw that the bully was just offended and realized if he could withstand Yi Yan's blow, he must be a tank. The muscle-bound thug, having torn off his shirt, gritted his teeth, declaring that no cheap tricks could change the fact that Yi Yan was a miserable smuggler who could do nothing but steal. He wanted to show Yi Yan his full strength of power that reflected the adventurer's spirit. After that incident with adhesion, people had started awakening abilities that surpassed their limits. though each one had their unique talents and hidden powers. Naturally, adventurers trained according to their abilities and were assigned roles, so one of them is a tank, and at the same time, we can see that the same bullies started using all his mass augmentation techniques: iron, skin enchantments, and giant power enchantments. The exact position where you protect your teammates from the dangers of the dungeon is tactical. Their role is to face monsters head on the front lines. The strength of their bodies trained to the limit allows them to repel bullets and shells, but the highest class tanks can withstand even the overwhelming firepower of missiles flying from the sky because they are the team's defense mechanism. Our hero realized that in front of him was a real adventurer who could even be considered a challenge. The brawny guy's strength was so immense that he broke the floor with 2 hands in a second, so the broker only had to pick up the bald guy who fell after this shaking to ensure he didn't get hurt. In any case, the broker thought that anyone fighting against Yen was just a complete fool. Was he really going to show up? Our hero, in turn, noticed all the sitting adventurers in front of him and immediately began to dodge despite all the provocations the goon was trying to use. Ya Yang didn't give in because he wasn't a fool. He had no intention of falling into another trap. The broker, observing everything from the side, understood that the bully was strong, with physical strength comparable to a decent truck. If he hit a person, every bone in their body would definitely be crushed. He shouted for our hero to finish him off as quickly as possible, because if there was even more destruction, it could affect their pay. Yan felt that if he didn't hurry, he would definitely be in trouble, but the bully thought the broker just didn't get what was happening. It was the bully who told our hero that his old tricks wouldn't be able to break through the body of a professional. Yeren liked that Tut was thinking that way, so his only choice at that moment was to grab the pipe next to him, which he thought would be enough for the next battle. The goon was so thrilled with this action, he began to rush at the hero with such fury and force that the wind around him started to whirl. Our hero understood that, for the overwhelming majority of people, tanks are socially considered invincible creatures. However, this is not the case. They have a clear weakness, a natural enemy, a creature that can concentrate a powerful destructive force and attack at one point like a damager that is far more formidable than them. At one point, as soon as our hero swung his stick and struck, the tank simply fell, completely drained of strength. A person like that has no problem destroying such a defense mechanism. The thug already lying on the floor couldn't believe it. After all, where had his opponent even learned such a skill? But of course, Wei Rang didn't know what he was talking about, and even if he tried to say something, he must be wrong. He might not be wrong though, because there was a chance the bully had seen something like this before. In their world, most adventurers are assigned one of 4 ranks based on their skills and achievements: stone, copper, silver, and gold. Based on their rank, there are various advantages, like permission to enter dungeons and tax reductions. The top 100 adventurers are called rankers, and they are ranked by color. In front of us is a pretty old house. Our hero continues to walk down the corridor because when he was very young, his father was the greatest adventurer to him. He constantly went into the courtyard to watch how he worked with his weapon, his famous spear, not just because he was his father, but for another reason as well. His name was Yam. He was one of the first generation heroes who could be called adventurers. The first adventurers. Despite everything, for those who didn't exist at that time, the history of the first generation is the greatest legend, but for the people of that time, it was hell. Many just died, dozens, hundreds, even more. There was not enough information about the dungeons, as well as what monsters inhabited them. They could meet a creature like Gamula, even if it was a young individual, and they simply didn't know what to oppose, because only during our hero's time were monsters considered easy prey, but back then, that was definitely not the case. For adventurers of that era, monsters were an unknown risk. They could always prepare something unexpected that no adventurer could have imagined. It was a time when there were no skills to fight monsters. Even titanium couldn't handle it. There were no items that are so common now. It was under such conditions that first-generation adventurers went through trial and error, risking their lives just like Yorang's father. Survivors passed on experiences and achievements to the next generation and became heroes. It was an incredible torment. Our hero's father was nicknamed the Dragon Slayer Yum. This is the nickname of the first Kama, and he was the best adventurer in Asia. He was not just a father, but also a man whom our hero respected more than anyone else in the world. He seemed invincible, but at one point, his father started coughing up blood. The reason for this was poison. During his research, his father had been poisoned with a deadly toxin. As always, the father tried to overcome it, but years later, his body was already at its limit. Colleagues whom the father had trusted in his life took advantage of his vulnerability and appropriated his achievements. For many years he suffered, both mentally and physically. Jahan visited him constantly, but even so, a year later, when the world began to forget about the dragon slayer Yusung, he was no longer that hero. He had lost everything and suffered from an incurable poison. All that remained of him was the forgotten memory of the white adventurer. Our hero recalled it all with an incredibly aching heart. The brokers were already telling the bald man that everything went smoothly just as someone was saying it. After all, he couldn't believe his bully would lose to some kid, but the broker insisted that it probably happened because he wasn't a good adventurer. Bragging about someone beating up a friend is definitely a sign of weakness. Yen talked about how, if there were only two reasons for a good adventurer to retire, it was either because their body was ruined beyond repair or because they died exploring. Our hero doesn't know what the bully's salary was, but if it was minimal, then it's better to fire him, because anyone could build a strong character. The broker approached the bald man and threw his arm over his shoulder. He said that despite the smallness of the group, he asked the bald man for some concepts, and also replied that the payment he would earn now had been doubled. The bald guys started shouting. He didn't like they just told him, but the broker was sure it was the bald guy who started provoking them, and they don't do anything for free. The bald man realized he wasn't in any position to argue, so he agreed to the price while our hero splashed water on himself, because he was a bit thirsty. The broker asked him if he had heard anything about the Imperial Wasp. As soon as Yang heard that name, he spat out the water he had been drinking. He asked her if that meant he would have to fight her, which was just too much. The Imperial Wasp, considered one of the most dangerous monsters not just in Korea, but worldwide, had made its nest in a cursed place called Uo, which had turned into the highest difficulty demon realm in Korea. The broker lit a cigarette and mentioned that even a top-ranked adventurer would struggle against one of those things since they're all over the place, making it impossible for a smuggler. But what about a white-ranked adventurer? According to the bald man, there had been a significant raid yesterday that the government hadn't reported, involving the military and a family of high-ranked adventurers forming a sweep squad. Our hero began to weigh his chances, counting people, but while doing that, the broker said most of Korea's stars were supposed to be involved. If the shifts found out, they'd lose their minds. If even two of those elite adventurers showed up together, they definitely wouldn't accomplish their original goal of eradication. However, it seemed they still managed to track down the queen after one of the seven snatched the royal jelly and hired a smuggler to bring it out. Our hero was puzzled by the name, so the broker explained that royal jelly is the food that wasps feed to their newborn queens. The main character started to grasp something, but then he clutched his head, wondering why white-ranked adventurers would hire a smuggler just for some food supplement. The broker informed him that there had been cases where Imperial Wasp royal jelly had entered the world, and reportedly, if a person consumed it, they could even come back from the dead. Everyone understood that all paths to the dungeons were strictly controlled, as claimed by the Adventurer Association and the government, but naturally, all of this was a lie. Right in front of the guy who had just been smoking, a gate opened as soon as he touched it. He warned our hero that even though he always gave cautious advice, he wanted to wish him good luck because this job would be especially tedious. Wairang, the broker, decided to think while puffing his cigarette. The main character didn't get why he was doing this, so the broker explained he was just curious why his employee didn't care about his warnings. Was it because of his claims that even the dead could be brought back to life with royal jelly? Our hero replied that wasn't the case. Rumors tend to blow things out of proportion, and even if it was considered a cure, it wouldn't bring his father back. If something like that existed, his father would never let anyone go. Just then, the gate opened for our hero. As soon as he pushed it slightly, the sun shined particularly bright on him. After that, dungeons started popping up all over the earth, including two that were considered the greatest in Korea. The first was in Jeju, a dungeon merged with a volcanic mountain range, and the second was the ugly Ijerjane, where Uo used to be, located in the center of Seoul. In front of us was the former Borum district, rated D+ for hazard. Yoido, Mapo, Jongno, and Yonggin were all engulfed by this dungeon, but most of it remains unexplored, and many adventurers die attempting to explore this area. It seems someone managed to switch goods from a danger rank of S to D+, but communication was lost in an unambiguous area. Many doubted such a person could have escaped. An injury or accident likely killed them. The broker figured there was a lot of chaos to get out of there, so our hero's only job at that moment was to inspect the designated area and retrieve items if there were any. He continued with what he said earlier, and the broker told him not to overthink things and just focus on his his work. Yarim, in turn, asked the broker, with a smile, if he really thought he would just run away with the goods. The white-haired man replied that they thought the main character was that foolish. He just told him to be careful and remember that the royal jelly was really valuable, but he wasn't the only one risking his life for it. At this point, Yarin hoped for a mask and started maneuvering with ropes to get exactly where he had to land. He was sure the whole forest around him was filled with jelly. At that same moment, he realized that the entire forest was likely drawn to that scent, and before him lay a massive footprint. While our hero was observing his surroundings, we saw a certain elf, Jin Saram, who was only in her first year at the Warrior Academy, in a very unfavorable position. She was facing the biggest problem of her life. What should have been an easy dungeon trip for an exam turned into an encounter with a monster that definitely didn't belong there. She was terrified, not understanding what was happening, especially because the test was supposed to be simple: just collect as many coins hidden in the dungeon as possible within the allotted time. Despite being designed to simulate real combat situations, it was the lowest ranking test. Everyone thought it would be a piece of cake since the location was considered a training ground for beginners. Of course, that wasn't true. Everyone believed the monsters there were weak and low on intelligence, but right then, in front of her, was a monster peeking from behind trees, smiling at her because it thought it had already won. In that moment, the elf realized escaping was impossible. All she could do was hope for a miracle. Still, she decided to fight, pulling out her bow with 3 arrows loaded. The Titan primate, still young, but already as dangerous as a 3-star threat, stood before her. Unsurprisingly, all the shots she fired just lodged into its hand without causing any harm. No matter how many arrows she shot, breaking through the skin of that massive primate was simply impossible. She tried to use her skills, but the primate just smiled, a mad grin that said the elf's attacks wouldn't hurt him. Even though there was no time to give up, she wanted him to come a little closer since she knew he wouldn't dodge or block. She thought he might let his guard down just a bit. At that moment, it was clear that Jin Saram could use magic because she was a magic archer. She had already used her skill to unleash an incredible fire shot that burned everything in its path. The type of magic contained in her arrows could change depending on the target. As a last resort, she had chosen an explosion spell capable of inflicting massive damage, enough to kill any 3-star danger monster. But, of course, everything went wrong. It would only work if the elf managed to hit him, but the monster jumped higher, snagging a nearby tree. Despair flashed across her face. She hadn't expected the monster to dodge so easily before she released the arrow. It just leaped out of the way. She couldn't believe it jumped, knowing she couldn't repeat the attack. What could she do? Run? She took off, but the monster, true to form, charged after her with that same crazed look until something hit it so hard it flew away. It was our hero, already there. The elf was shocked, thinking she'd just been saved, but Yaren knew he'd only slapped the monster on the chin, and it didn't seem like it was enough because the beast was still on its feet. At that moment, the main character pulled out a certain tool and charged head-on at the monster. The elf thought he was insane. All our hero shouted was for her to close her eyes. At first, the elf didn't get it, but the moment she did and followed his instructions, there was an incredibly bright flash, after which the monster began to scream. Our hero executed the operation so fast and efficiently that all he could think about was that he had used up his last tool, stun torch, made from the scales of a shimmering fish from deep-sea dungeons and capable of immobilizing. It was a marvel for its price, loved by countless adventurers, but due to its clumsy use, some had lost their eyesight, leading to its ban. By the time the elf opened her eyes, our hero told her she should be on her own, because she only had a few seconds left before the monster came to its senses. Yaron started running because, in the dungeon, no one was coming to help him. He remembered what the broker said: smugglers are just cockroaches to everyone, just good for a reward. So if that forest was anywhere, it would definitely be trampled down. While he was thinking about this, he turned to check for followers, and the only one there was the elf. He realized hiding was a better option. As soon as he jumped up high, he vanished, which surprised Alika because she was sure he had been right in front of her. Just as she was thinking that, Jiren fell from the branches, landing right on top of her and pinning her head to the ground with his staff. He couldn't figure out what the elf wanted from him, but lying there with a satisfied expression, she wanted to tell him how grateful she was for saving her. The main character thought she was just messing with him. Did he really look that foolish? Then Alika said that wasn't her only reason for pursuing him. She knew perfectly well He was a smuggler, which is why she sought to offer him a job. Our hero noticed a familiar sign on her shirt and warned her he wouldn't help again and wasn't interested in how crazy a warrior's school student born with a silver spoon in her mouth was, because he'd really kill her if she got in his way. As soon as our protagonist turned his back on her, he saw that the reward for the smuggler notice was 50 million. Meanwhile, the reward for capture was about 450 million. He turned toward her with an incredibly angry look. He was serious, but behind him, he spotted an item similar to a monster's blood that could only be acquired by capturing at least 5 of the same type. She mentioned it was an advance, but if he helped her with the exam, she'd pay more. Our hero thought that was ridiculous. She was not just spoiled but a crazy elf. But it didn't matter if she was crazy or not. It was an opportunity to change his life completely. Our protagonist sighed and said he figured it would come to this. He told her it was her fault because he really didn't want to kill her, but he'd already warned her she had only a few seconds. Right above them was that monster, the one who had caught up with them. He hadn't handed her the staff just to make her stare. If she remembered the attack she threw earlier, she needed to do the same thing. He asked her to channel her magic from the staff and throw it back at him. The elf screamed that she didn't have any magic left, but Yaren calmly told her to climb up with it because he didn't think he could fight with his hands for long. She realized she had less than a quarter of her magic remaining, which wouldn't deal any damage to the monster. She continued charging the staff with her energy while thinking it would be better to just run away, drawing the monster's attention to our hero, but she still tossed him what was already charged with magic. She really thought she was insane for not running away, but the main character expressed disappointment in her. He pointed out that what she gave him was less than a quarter of the power she'd unleashed the first time. Still, he believed it was enough. The students of the warrior school had heard this so many times they couldn't even count. When facing a monster, brute force isn't the only factor. Timing and hitting the right spots matter too. In other words, that's what adventurers should hone first, their instincts and abilities. At that moment, our heroes struck the throat, or more precisely, the chin of the monster with the help of the staff, making it open its mouth wide, likely bringing back childhood memories for the elf, as she'd often passed through her academy heading to her limousine, where her butlers and drivers awaited her. She was saying goodbye to her friends, but all she heard behind her were comments about how incredibly lucky she was, having everything others could only dream of. And honestly, that was true. She could get anything that came her way, even a company that ranked 4th in South Korea's business world. China Group. The heir of this company had married an elf from another world, and from that marriage, Jinam was born, the same elf who was sitting in that ridiculously expensive car, constantly watching them as they headed to the dungeon. But despite all her training, it didn't pay off because she had too much human blood in her instead of elven blood. She was practically no different from ordinary people, and many elves thought it was strange that her father didn't just stop her. He actually encouraged her. Even though he did, he felt he made the right choices because this was the path his daughter chose. In front of them was Jinsung Zhao, Ram's father, who was currently the head of the Special Development Department at China Group. He said you didn't need to have the abilities of an elf to become a hunter. The elf agreed because everything he said was true, but for a person, such abilities wouldn't be unnecessary. Yet she was not much better than the average teenager. He asked her to clarify one detail. The daughter of that particular person wasn't ordinary. She definitely wouldn't give up easily. In her determination, she was like his sister, even though humans couldn't compare to elves, because even if they died as monsters and then resurrected, if she tried her hardest, she'd probably reach an average level. For an ordinary person, even such words would be seen as praise and acknowledgement. But his daughter had too much. Besides her abilities, she had wealth, fame, and genesol, of which could instantly devalue her efforts, making her a laughingstock and possibly an outcast that everyone would turn their backs on. She definitely wouldn't be able to handle that attitude for long. They thought all of this because abilities don't just drop from the sky like a bloodline or something. As soon as they learned the whole story about this elf, by that time, she was already a giant. She couldn't believe it because they were the same age. Our hero reproached himself because most likely, the mask he was warned not to break had been cracked. It contained a very expensive item. He thought it looked too ordinary, but the broker replied that the mask allowed him to see interference in facial recognition and had more than 4 types of magic cast on it. But that was when it got ruined, and he knew Tom had just been a bit unlucky that day. While he stood there trying to cover his face, Leah asked if he was in pain or if he was at school. Our hero got a little nervous and said something nonsensical, quickly handing over what he promised her. As soon as she held out her hand with the amulet, he grabbed it instantly. He thought she was just a rich girl and hoped it wasn't fake. At that moment, while he continued looking at the amulet, The girl only smiled. She asked if the one who saved her really needed money because she understood tuition fees weren't cheap in any institution where future hunters were trained, so she could help with this. But Yaren, without even listening, said he didn't go to such places. He said the elf didn't turn to him because he wasn't attending that school. He wasn't even close. The girl was shocked. Who taught him that fighting technique? Our hero replied that no one had taught him because he was self-taught, which amazed the elf even more than before. She started shouting that it was nonsense because such movements couldn't belong to someone who was self-taught. Eventually, the game ended, and at the same time, our hero threw his card in her face, saying he was only studying at Dongan High School. He said there was nothing to think about because it was just a school with a liberal arts background. The elf shook in her hands, scared. She said that couldn't be. Surely something was off, but our hero said she might not believe him, yet she was obligated to show either a student ID or another document. By then, he had already received her business card, which had her name and confirmed they were the same age. He immediately pocketed her student badge, which surprised the elf. She couldn't understand why he needed it, but our hero got a bit annoyed, explaining it was her idea to give him a job. He thought it was necessary since she had already seen his face. He wanted to take everything he could so she wouldn't change her mind later. Plus, it wasn't done yet. He asked her to come closer for a picture, which she did, feeling embarrassed. But Yaren said that instead of a contract, she should know smugglers' accomplices get the same punishment. At that moment, Psalm realized she might have gotten involved with someone more dangerous than she thought, but it was too late because the photo had been taken, and our hero, with an incredibly cruel smile, told her to smile. His eyes sparkled, showing he was ready to work. As soon as the photo was on our protagonist's phone, he asked what he was supposed to do because he needed to know his goals to estimate the costs for himself. The girl replied that he needed to collect coins because in 6 hours, he had to gather coins hidden in different corners of the exam field and find a box with a picture of coins to confirm her identity. She had already found one coin. If he found another, she'd pass the exam. It wasn't that far away. Of course, our hero was curious where the second coin was. The elf replied it was located where the Eugene shopping center used to be. This shocked our smuggler, who was currently munching on a chocolate bar. He exclaimed that now things made sense, as he had crossed paths with that monster not by chance, because he, too, was looking for something likely inside that shopping center. He told her what he wanted, but she screamed at him, saying it was very dangerous to go to the wasp. But despite all the elf's warnings, Yaren just kept eating his chocolate bar, explaining he wasn't searching for a rel. He was after something like honey since it has a strong smell that attracts monsters. So, most likely, that monster they defeated recently was just wandering back. Our smuggler didn't care, but he sort of told her she had to send him there in person and asked if the coins were definitely there. She thought for a moment, but then said there were no more coins left elsewhere. The rest had already been collected by other teams. At that moment, he understood what was happening, because if there were other teams, it was clear why things had gone down like this. So he said it would be even better for him because he suggested getting her a coin, and she said that would be his job. He asked about the price, and the elf girl replied that it was 950 million, which amazed our hero. Even though she said this was all the cash she could use right now, she added that if it wasn't enough, he should give her some time. He mentioned there would definitely be enough to start with, and if there were any additional expenses later, they could handle it then. So he asked if they had everything they needed, and they should head toward their goal. The elf was once again convinced that Jiren was incredibly fast. Of course, she didn't see his shocked face at the amount he had just heard, and he even thought he should have asked for more. While running, the elf had a question, and our hero was ready to answer. She asked him if he really didn't study anywhere, but our protagonist said he couldn't say that he hadn't learned from anyone at all since he did pick up a few things in his childhood. But at the same time, he noticed monsters ahead and asked her to get ready. There were raptors ahead living in the old Borum area, which had about 2 stars of danger. Our hero, of course, charged into battle, but the elf, being a real archer, just jumped back. We can understand that Jiren had never been trained in the hunter's techniques, as most of his skills were gained through experience when he risked his life and fought with his bare hands. However, there was one exception. As a child, he watched his father train and learned a simple technique from him. The first of these was a needle technique that enhanced everything's speed, strength, body, weight, and could target the enemy's weak points. It might sound easy just to take on your opponent, but in reality, it's not simple because the sense of the ability comes from experience. Even among high-rank hunters, not many can say they've mastered such a technique on their own, but Jiren had perfected it. Once the monsters were defeated, the elf remarked that something was strange, noting that these monsters gathered in groups of at least 5. The smuggler replied that it meant she wasn't the only one suffering damage from the royal jelly, because soon all sorts of creatures would gather around, so he suggested taking a little break and then moving on. Even at this moment, Fika couldn't miss the chance to ask our hero if he really had any individual lessons as a child. Of course, Jiren replied that there were no formal lessons since he just observed training a few times, and then started repeating everything. This information shocked the elf even more. His words stuck in her mind, and she noticed he looked odd, which prompted her to express her irritation. Yaren couldn't understand why it annoyed her, but at the same time, she threw him a strange ampule. An ampule of stamina that was worth about 100. She told him to drink it, because he probably wasn't in the best condition either. The main character replied that if she gave him the ampule, just because he annoyed her, she could have said something nicer. To her surprise, he simply put it in his pocket, saying he could sell it later. The girl blushed and asked if our hero knew how much it was worth, questioning because it was only worth a few, but Yaren told her he knew that if he sold this ampule on the black market, he could get just the same million. This caused the elf to misunderstand. Her mind went blank as our hero seemed to have eaten stranger food every time. He then said that they should not hang around and should leave quickly. She thought that rich kids were very strange. As soon as the two of them arrived at the store, Yin wanted to clarify once more that their goal wasn't to linger. They just needed to safely get what each needed and leave, because no matter what monster was inside, they needed to keep control and follow the smuggler's lead. She had studied a lot, and survival was definitely his specialty, so she asked him to handle it. At this moment, something strange was happening to C-Rom. She couldn't comprehend how she felt, since she had spent half a year in the School of Heroes, where she couldn't gain recognition or settle down. Now, she was going to the danger zone with someone for the first time, which was thrilling. But as soon as they entered the store, they saw something that nobody ever wanted to see. Each of them saw it for the first time, the remains of all the monsters that were there before. In turn, it made them realize that a person is much bolder than they think. You just need to prepare, and you can face any situation. If we talk about problems, they can arise even when things go beyond the expected. The elf thought all these monsters living in the area were quite dangerous, even for professional hunters, so what could be inside that caused such destruction? Our hero warned her to be more careful because there was definitely something very dangerous inside. Yen understood something about it, but she was just surprised because it turned out to be much worse than she thought. However, this didn't change anything because there was a monster called Chopping Rib Ad, whose danger level ranged from 2 to 3 stars. He immediately whipped out his huge tongue and grabbed our hero's staff, throwing it to the side. Despite the loss of his weapon, our protagonist jumped onto the monster's head, knocking him down. She expressed her fear, thinking he had died, but it turned out he was tenacious. To this, our hero said it wasn't about survivability, he was specifically left alive to warn others who would come there. We understand that the chopping rib has a strange property. When threatened, his terrible cry alerts other monsters. The elf couldn't comprehend who could possibly do such a thing when, at that very moment, a man in a white robe appeared above them. He said it was him. He couldn't stay awake and wait for them because there were more of those things than he expected, and he was overwhelmed with fatigue. The elf thought he was a hunter, but only then did she take the man's words seriously, realizing they probably knew our hero, judging by the expression on Yaren's face. The hunter continued, saying it was strange because everyone in front of him was quite small for smugglers. At the same time, he noticed the badge of the School of Heroes on the elf's shirt. He leaped down to them and said he didn't care what kind of alliance they had, but he was very sorry because they would have to die where they were. Yil's knees began to tremble, and our hero asked her not to speak to him because the man standing before them, an unusual hunter, seemed like a villain who wanted to kill our protagonist and then get the royal jelly. Yaren mentioned that he didn't think he had anything to do with his client. After all, how would he handle the consequences if he stole from someone else? Despite all that, the man replied that he didn't think it was worth worrying about if he got caught. By the way, he felt lucky because he accidentally overheard that his colleague was going to be playing games with something valuable. Originally, He planned to strike when the monster was heading there, but he knew they always come as someone else wants them to. He even felt sorry for not completing the plan since he saw the monster run off in that direction but couldn't track it down. He figured there had to be a hideout where the treasure could be stashed. At the same time, Yan realized that the connection with the person in charge wasn't severed by the wasp's poison, but rather by that person's own doing. Even though Yan didn't need to personally fight him to understand that the man in front of him was incredibly dangerous, he recognized that this guy was a true hunter, unlike the riffraff he had dealt with before. That was when he ordered the elf to find the coin and get out, emphasizing that, unlike the hunter, it was best for her to leave as soon as possible. It wasn't dangerous in the building anymore. Thanks to the man, the elf started to protest, saying that their hero would be in danger, but Yaren was sure that nothing would change if she stayed. As soon as he said this, the hunter started his attack. He declared he had heard everything and was already close to them. Yaren blocked the attack with his staff and insisted that the elf make her exit quickly because he could only get her money when he was ready. Only she would survive. The hunter, confident of his victory, laughed, saying letting the elves escape wasn't the best move because they would have a better chance of survival if they stayed together. An incredible battle broke out between them, yet Yaren didn't understand the nonsense the hunter was spouting. At the same time, he tapped into his powers again and read the trajectory of the hunter's sword, which shocked the hunter. He didn't expect that from a schoolboy like Yaren. He hadn't even thought he would need equipment, but despite that, it turned out Yan was more than a professional, so he would definitely have to exert himself to get that elf out of hero school. Right in front of them was Yang Duan, a gold-ranked hunter, now looking entirely different in a strange mask. Meanwhile, while everything unfolded in the dungeons, the broker continued sitting in his famous chair, brewing himself some food. He even suggested to the bald man that he brew a glass for himself and asked him to sit down, as their hero wouldn't wake up anytime soon. The bald man looked down on him, thinking that the goons were only brawn, even though he paid him a lot. He heard the man boasting about his strength, claiming he was a hunter but a broker too. He lost not because he was foolish but because he deserved to lose. The fact that he was bald was simply wrong because hunters shouldn't fight with ordinary people. It applied to the bully as well, since he was trained in hunting and exploration. Sure, he might have been able to handle the monster, but it was no shock that it was dealt with by a smuggler. The bald man yelled at the broker, insisting that he heard hunters fought each other too, to which the broker replied that was certainly true. There are instances when they battle each other because the higher their level, the further it can go. Even comrades who rely on each other can stab a close buddy in the back out of greed. The bald man was shocked. Do they really kill each other? He wondered. The broker said, well, no one can forbid them. Anything can happen inside a dungeon. You could just claim it was your comrades who killed the monster, not the one who actually did it. In fact, it doesn't even require an alibi. To sum it up, the higher the hunter's level, the more they train for fights with each other, but the bully wasn't at that level. The fact that he beat up a colleague amused the broker. It even sounded cute, given that if he was found on the wrong side of this, it meant the incident happened in her dungeon over some trivial equipment skirmish. The bald man's spirits dropped as he realized all the merits the bully bragged about were evaporating by the second. Simultaneously, the broker said that when hunters go out to hunt, they take armor and weapons with them, though it didn't seem much sense. If only he had that, his friend could have competed. The bald man asked if they were really that crucial, questioning whether he could even do it without them. The broker reassured him it was way too important. For hunters, equipment is half their combat power. Meanwhile, our hero noted that the hunter hadn't missed his attack and hit his target just right. However, as he pondered this, the opponent declared it was enough to dwell on trivial nonsense. He immediately charged Yaren, stating it was rude to him and to their own lives. First, he only used a sword, but then he brought his legs into the mix, kicking Yaren back and grazing him with his sword. The hunter loved it all, telling Yaren to show his best, but it was clear this was impossible, because the hunter had a shadow jacket and a plus-rank armor. This gear's properties supported physical strength and provided cover against blows. Those were the essentials of the berserk-style Yang Duan used. Yaren knew he couldn't lack weak points, but if he relentlessly countered the attacks, he'd definitely die. He was aware of this, yet at one point, our hero got wounded in the stomach. The hunter thought he could last long enough, but Yaren remarked that it seemed like a special day, wearing his favorite clothes, as despite the blow, he was hardly injured. This shocked the hunter. Yaren continued, mentioning that his opponent didn't stand a chance because he was just an ordinary student with nothing against someone who relied entirely on gear. If Yaren had armor, the outcome would be entirely different. The hunter was like a spoiled brat, beginning to cry out of sheer rage, his aura radiating throughout the county, and Ji-Ren realized his enemy was desperate, needing to destroy him to catch up and shut him up. So the only thing our protagonist did was buy time, while his opponent grew more rushed, which allowed him to catch his mistakes again and again. He utilized his new equipment and activated his second technique, one he had developed during childhood while spying on his father. This technique, impossible to perform with Yarm's power, would take the strength from the enemy and turn it against him to deliver a powerful blow. He named this technique Swell. It forced his opponent directly into the ground, even though it required intense concentration and strength. Up until that day, he never imagined he would use this technique against a human, let alone face a professional hunter who attacked so recklessly. Yang told him to give up because if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to defeat him, but then something utterly unexpected happened. The hunter pulled out a dagger and stabbed himself in the stomach. The hunter was determined that no matter how it ended, he had to win. He had to destroy our hero. His eyes glowed bright red, and his whole body blistered, indicating he meant business. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor of the shopping center, the elf had found the very box she needed to log into before heading back. As soon as she touched it, she felt a tremendous crack of the building. She remembered our hero, urging her to escape, and realized that nothing would change if she returned. Clutching a coin in her hand, she recalled the face of that monster, and tried to reassure herself that our hero surely had a plan for escape. This is the backstory of Hunter Duan. Since childhood, he had tormented everyone around him, beating up anyone and forcing them to apologize. He was a genius, everything came easy to him, and he knew it. Adults recognized his talents, and his peers worshipped him. However, there was one thing he couldn't do. He couldn't take the Hero High School exams, because it was said that entrance was only possible through connections. Many claimed he was more about money than skill, which may have been true. If it were a contest of ability and talent, he definitely wouldn't have lost. Unlike ordinary students, he was a chosen genius who amassed so many points that he always came in first. The point gap was enormous, and everyone believed he was destined to become a ranker. Even at graduation, the masters congratulated him, saying he finished school brilliantly, assuring him he would become a first-class hunter. He wished he would never turn up his nose, but instead keep moving forward. Of course, that same hunter was too arrogant in his youth. He thought a loser who had retired to teach kids in school wouldn't measure up to him from some high perch beyond the grasp of ordinary folks. Naturally, as soon as he became a hunter, something happened that turned his life upside down. He was covered in blood, terrified as he faced someone who had destroyed the monster that had wiped out his entire team. That person's gaze was familiar to him, just like the faces of those he was staring at. It was then that he realized the old man's words weren't advice, but comfort. He wasn't the chosen one, just one of those ordinary people, but perhaps a little better. We are again transported to the battle between our hero and Yang Duqian. Yang commented that the jacket he wore was made from a living monster, Kurava Pizza, allowing him to absorb the blood flowing through its heart. This was the price for killing Yarm, and our hero was glad because it only sounded dangerous, and truthfully, the monster's speed wasn't that impressive. That's what he thought at first, but once he took a hit, he struggled to block it. Despite having extraordinary reflexes and great abilities, he was slowing down. Yang couldn't understand why this was suddenly a compliment, as it didn't relate to him. While saying this, he was taking the elixir gifted by the elf. The moment he drank it, the demon declared that since the main character was acting so smug, he'd be ready to trample him. The demon was confident he could handle it, but our hero believed all was well, as physically, he felt fine. The demon kept shouting, encouraging our hero to show more excitement. Focused on himself, he realized the demon couldn't strike endlessly because if it consumed blood, it would eventually reach a limit. He needed to force the demon to spend its energy and draw blood, then use the needle technique. But at one point, he saw he had hit a dead end. It was too late, and the demon was nearly on top of him. Just as he thought it was all over, a fire arrow struck the demon. It was the elf, and our hero realized she was pretty gutsy, which impressed him. In that instant, he attacked the hunter. At the same time, he detached himself, and the elf figured he just passed out. Our hero told her not to worry too much, as people like him should be strong enough to survive. He even took a picture, probably to show his boss, the broker, after which she said he would no longer be a bother, otherwise, he'd have to kiss his career and reputation goodbye. She also said they could consider their debts settled. Initially, the wreck didn't understand what she meant, so our hero reminded her he had saved her life once, or rather twice. first from a monster, and then when she chased after him, he said he counted as 2 times, which made the elf blush. She couldn't comprehend why he couldn't just say thank you, something so easy. By this point, as Yang walked away smiling, they followed the sweet smell right to the person holding the briefcase. He was dead, but our hero noted that the elf didn't seem very surprised, so he asked her not to be surprised because he warned her that there was nothing good inside. He decided to check only for the presence of that rare honey, its distant and sweet aroma making you forget all thoughts. After all, he didn't have to come to that scent, and he even wondered if there was royal jelly inside too. After that, he asked the elf to get out of there as soon as possible, as it was unknown who else might appear. Then they decided it was time to go to the first floor. The elf noticed that the guy they had recently beaten had already disappeared and was shouting from the entrance that they would see him again because he had memorized their faces and would definitely kill them in some way, so they would regret what they did today. This guy was running, relieved to escape, but at that moment, a monster appeared that could eat him in a single bite. So, our hero suggested they find a safe place, which the elf agreed to. At one point, our protagonist reached the safe zone and asked Ala what was going on with the exam. The elf said she still had plenty of time. Our hero extended his hand to her, saying it was nice to meet her. They had a lot going on, but in any case, they managed to finish their business safely. They shook hands, and at the end, Jan reminded her to remember their bank transfer, telling her not to forget if she didn't want to see him again. Just as he was about to leave, the elf surprised him by suggesting they meet again. So, in an instant, Ye Rang was back, shocking his broker, who noticed that he had to work hard. As soon as the broker opened the box, he saw the same royal jelly inside. He even found out that if he managed to sell it, there would definitely be a fuss because how many tasks could you afford with that money? In general, our hero was doing great. He would definitely transfer money to him tomorrow, but as soon as the broker looked at him, he noticed something was off, so he asked if it was because of that hunter who died in the fight with him. Our protagonist replied that the guy didn't die because of him, and he didn't have to feel sorry for his wife. The broker suggested that something else probably happened, but to this, our hero insisted nothing happened and asked if he could take what he wanted from the royal jelly because that wasn't the concern. The broker looked in the box and said he could take it, as smugglers could take everything not related to the order. Those were their rules. But the broker was also curious about what kind of baby would eat this jelly. Our hero was confused at first, so the broker mentioned that, although it could even bring a dying person back to life, it had a more attractive property. It could expand the abilities of the one who eats it, though not many knew that, as jelly was more effective if eaten in childhood. So, he wouldn't feed such a thing to someone without hope. It should at least be a student from the School of Heroes. Our hero was already leaving, and the broker told him to send greetings to his father, as his condition had worsened dramatically lately. By this point, as soon as our hero started coming out from where his boss was, he recalled that the elf had mentioned it wasn't a joke. Apparently, there would be an exam for transferring to their school. At least 1 or 2 capable students were recruited from the set every year, but she was sure it would be our hero who would get in. She asked him to go to the School of Heroes. We can understand that no hunter can clear the dungeon alone, no matter how excellent their qualities or strength. Something can always happen that no one expects. In other words, it's almost impossible to handle the endless waves of attacking monsters alone, so you need a team. Each hunter applies their own skill, allowing team members to make up for each other's shortcomings and overcome obstacles while fighting monsters. This is the dungeon cleanup that should take place, and in the School of Heroes, as the elf said, special groups are created every year. Our hero asked what this meant, as if it really was about choosing one side and fighting the other, but the elf replied that she wouldn't talk about such childish jokes. In her course, there are 2 groups headed by 2 students in the top 3. It was then that our hero asked if the team was recruited from those in one of the groups. So why couldn't the elf get into one? Why didn't the teachers say anything? Isn't that strange? The elf only said that the search for a team depended on student ability, and she understood what our protagonist wanted to say with his own words. He expressed that he understood he lacked abilities, and she knew she couldn't become an excellent student, but she wasn't so bad at school that she wouldn't sign on to any team if she didn't belong to a group. They created their own team because it was mentioned earlier that there are 2 groups. The leader of one of them is just disliked or fake. Although this doesn't show outwardly, they weave intrigues behind their backs to be accepted nowhere. The hero asked if something like this could happen, something just stealing her boyfriend, but the elf was sure that wasn't the case at all. In general, she led to the fact that she was left alone without a team, but in the 2nd and 3rd years, she could no longer do this, so she wanted to recruit our hero because of his abilities, believing that if he was near, she could survive. Our hero was at home, bandaging himself, and thinking that her proposal was ridiculous, but at one point, She had already reached the dungeon barrier branch 12. She felt upset, thinking that our protagonist would not call back, but her thoughts were interrupted by the teacher who met her near a tree. Alika asked if something was wrong, as the exams weren't over yet, but the teacher mentioned there was a problem, because monsters were found in areas they shouldn't be. He said it was good that no one was injured, but there was a signal that in some places, continuing the exam was impossible. Where she found the coin was exactly in that zone. He came up to her and asked if there really hadn't been any problems during the exam. The elf, even though something had indeed happened, said she hadn't seen anything. So, the teacher asked her to stand behind him because a monster was behind her. It looked much stronger than the one she had encountered before. It was a titanium monkey, already an adult, with a level reaching 3 or 4 stars. This all seemed very strange to the teacher because he knew that people like these didn't usually live around here. Something must have led it there. The elf immediately thought it could just be the smell, and asked the teacher once again to stand behind him. After all the teachers at the hero school were former hunters, most of whom graduated from this very school. Now retired due to injuries, they could no longer protect dungeons. This was just an outsider's opinion, but the anti-tyranny fighter earned a nickname when he was not yet 30 and ranked as a top hunter. The moment the titanium monkey lunged at him, he poured all his strength into his iron fist, and in an instant, the head of the monkey flew off its shoulders, leaving half of its head behind. The teacher mentioned that in a normal situation, one must restrain themselves, so it was lucky for her. Something terrible could have happened. Still, he shook her shoulder and reassured her that it was good she was still alive, suggesting they head back. He wasn't concerned about others' opinions because, after all, he was a hero himself, training future heroes. The scene shifts to the training camp for basic skills at the hero school, where many students had gathered, curious about what would happen to those who sent a request for help. Most likely, they would be retaking the exam, which meant many people had a stroke of luck, though those who sent in the requests were seen as weaklings. Among them was the same elf the teacher asked to wait. Upon everyone's return, she checked if everything was in order and changed into her school uniform. As soon as the elf showed up, the one who had been bothering her declared that she'd warned everyone she'd be fine. She didn't know how to deal with others, but she definitely grasped situations quickly. That was Anisha, who made it clear she wasn't really worried. Even as she spoke of her, the elf admitted that she found it unexpected to be concerned about her, so Anisha pretended to care and feigned being offended, calling her a loser. 6 years prior, the uncle of that same girl who was indeed a fake tried teaching her magic when her powers were still quite weak. He constantly urged her to strengthen herself. Zekesser, her uncle, told her to focus and not to be distracted. When the elf, just 11 years old at the time, struggled to use magic, Zeke suggested they stop, noting her progress still paled in comparison to earlier attempts. Glancing back, she noticed Anisha Esser, also 11 years old. Their uncle was similar to her, resembling a half-elf, not just in looks, but also in magical control, surpassing many purebreds. He considered her cousin a genius. If even an elf pursued hunting, comparisons were bound to follow. However, caution was needed, as a fallback could crush her, given her cruel look, which was reminiscent of the most ruthless individuals. As soon as Anisha felt the elf's gaze on her, she remarked she couldn't understand why the elf wouldn't want her on the team, given her lack of quality. Offered to join her team, but as soon as she said that, Anisha denied it, claiming it would be too much. Despite wanting to team up, they were both long-range fighters, and if they were at the same level, why double up in one position? Anisha returned to her true form, her disbelief and clear disdain for the elf evident. She added that another team member could end up getting hurt, telling the elf not to worry since they might be preparing for a retake of the exam. Meanwhile, the elf approached her nonchalantly, saying she didn't care about the retake. Knowing she could pass it, Anisha raised her hands in surprise, mistakenly believing that the elf worked hard, but she warned her not to overdo it since she'd end up with her father's company. This comment infuriated the elf. She was aggressive yet restrained her bubbling emotions, but as soon as the elf turned away, Anisha showed her true colors again. Meanwhile, at the Nami Seoul University Hospital, our protagonist made a break for it, bursting through one of the doors, breathless from running full speed. He bumped into 2 hospital staff who asked if he was a relative. Our hero didn't respond since his appearance alone made it clear he was. He inquired about a sudden attack, leading the doctors to exchange glances before revealing that his father had an extremely rare case essentially essentially the only one of its kind in the world. No one had survived after being poisoned by dragon venom until now. The main character exclaimed that even modern medical technology couldn't heal him, but they could provide painkillers. The doctor sighed, confirming that while they could manage that, the source of these painkillers was a rare milk produced by super dangerous monsters. Specifically, they'd need tiger milk to combat the poison from the dragon. Our protagonist noted that he knew this was serious, but pressed the doctor, asking if it was merely a financial issue. Rumors circulated among hunters about a new case. Just a small dose could enhance muscle strength and resistance for a long time, yet, acquiring it had become challenging. Previously, it could be bought, but now, it was scooped up by entrepreneurs and hunters in massive quantities. Incredibly frustrated, the main character slammed his hand on the table, bemoaning a scenario where he couldn't scrounge up a few dollars to save just one person. Understanding the spirit of the hero, the doctor explained the real problem. A single dose for his father could yield several dozen injections of potion, since if more people needed it, the state imposed regulations, and for one patient, they wouldn't part with profits. Of course, they'd find ways to keep their profits without special connections. All this information hit hard. The main character felt drained, leaving the hospital and stepping outside. By now it was evening, and he decided to call the elf asking before it was too late, because if so, he might agree. The elf assumed he'd have conditions, and, when he laid them out, she mentioned she'd need to check first, but thought it would work since their company produced the potion, especially because he didn't need much. He felt relief wash over him, unable to believe the luck. The elf, sensing he wasn't displeased about something, suggested they meet on Sunday, noting he should prepare for exams. Preparation, after all, couldn't hurt. The time had come as we caught sight of a special research institute for the defense industry, the Chinsen Group, and right at the entrance stood our hero. He turned around, noticing an elf behind him who remarked on him being early and asked if he was feeling alright. The only thing on his mind was what they were up to in front of this building. The elf, who looked quite fancy and had arrived in a luxury car, said they were just going to measure his abilities. After the world began to change, people developed abilities that defied the laws of nature. Before things merged, ordinary folks had D-rank abilities except for mages. When someone's stats increased by a degree and hit C rank, they were considered geniuses. Stats above B rank were something one could brag about. The elf explained that aside from magical power, at least 5 indicators needed to reach level C to become a hunter. If 3 of them hit B rank, then Yaren could apply to the School of Heroes. Unfortunately, his ability rank was still a mystery. He scratched his head and asked the elf if that meant he would have to undergo some kind of physical exam. The elf responded that those were only done in childhood, and it was trickier to measure in adolescence. He was curious about how much trickier it would be, but in that moment, he was suited up in what looked like an astronaut's outfit. It struck him as odd that he hadn't immediately figured it out. When the elf asked how he was feeling, appearing in front of him was Jacon, a robot he had to face. Yaren realized he needed to put some effort in because honestly, he was itching to see his own stats. He was prepared to strike, but he knew he was being watched not only by the elf, but also by another scientist who noted his confidence. Usually, most people got scared when they first saw golems. If everything the elf told the scholar was true, it seemed like our hero was ready. The scientist had a colleague named Young Een, who was a summoner of golems, and a former huntress working at the Chinsen Group Research Center. The elf started getting a bit nervous, acknowledging that it was probably true our hero seemed well prepared. Just then, the scientist finished her coffee, set the mug down, and quickly hit the button to launch the golem into battle. We learned that aptitude measurements usually happen around age 6 or 7, but for detailed assessments, a special device was needed that pushes the body to its limits in various areas. The more unique abilities a person had and the better trained they were, the harder it was to get an accurate reading because it stretched them to the limit. The elf reasoned out loud that someone like our protagonist likely had a professional level indicator, and identifying his limits wasn't going to be easy. An unusual incident had happened just yesterday, so she thought his physical strength should be nearing the maximum. The scientist was taken aback, recalling how a previous friend of hers had flunked an entrance exam at a normal school and couldn't get into a specialized one. Out of curiosity, she looked at our protagonist and wondered how he could possibly fail with abilities like his. Even if she had lowered the difficulty level, it was obvious he was professionally trained. He didn't just charge in but tried to evade the golem's attacks first, waiting for the right moment to land a precise hit, leaving the scientist in awe. His instincts were sharper than any pro she'd seen. The elf asked about the other dimensions, and the scientist hesitated, struggling to answer. John Wren, standing before her, definitely hadn't hit his limits yet. This meant she'd need to ramp up the difficulty, but honestly, she thought that would be pointless since the results were likely to be standard. Bringing a golem on full power into safe mode could lead to unwanted consequences, and the elf knew that removing the safe mode for someone who wasn't a professional hunter was definitely prohibited. She couldn't wrap her mind around how they could check our hero's abilities. This was the first time they faced a case like his. After a long pause, a familiar voice broke through their thoughts, and they all froze. Mr. Boss had just walked in, slightly shocked that they were using his lab without permission. It was Zeke, the teacher of the elf, and the director of research and development at the Chinsen Group. He had a bad feeling, knowing Uncle Fick didn't usually work on Sundays. Zeke remarked they'd better realize they were going to face consequences for their actions. They started to explain that she'd requested everything they were using in the lab, but Zeke wasn't having it. He said such excuses wouldn't absolve his subordinates' mistakes, stating that technically, this was her father's company, not her own. In that moment, the scholar realized the rumors about Zeke were true. Despite being Saram's uncle, he had always been cold to her since childhood, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Zeke was about to say something when he noticed a face on the monitors was that one of Saram's classmates. Saram bowed her head, trying to speak, but the scientists jumped in to explain that he just wanted to become a hunter but failed the exams last year and had lost his measurement indicators. Since those weren't cheap, they were just trying to help someone in a rough spot. Uncle Zeke then noticed the golem meant to test strength was broken and said he'd do it himself. The scientist was taken aback. Did he really mean what she thought he meant? But Zeke just mentioned that they couldn't proceed with measurements while the golem was on safe mode, so he'd step in and personally take on Yaren. Yaren was there, holding the pole in his hands, thinking there had to be some mistake. This hardly ever happened, but when it became tough to measure limit values, they could arrange a battle between hunters. Naturally, the opponent had to have skills that surpassed those measuring the indicators by a few levels. Just then, the doors swung open again. The same elf came out, saying this was unexpected, but they wouldn't miss the show. They simply didn't have the luxury of time. Yarong immediately ducked, not because he knew who his opponent was, but because he sensed danger. Zeke, on the other hand, noted that it seemed like our protagonist had caught on to what was happening, so the elf would do everything possible to take the golem's place. The only thing Yarong felt at that moment was that this opponent was way stronger than the guy he'd never seen before. He felt like he couldn't beat him and, in turn, urged him to attack, even claiming there was no need to worry about his safety. At that moment, our hero unleashed all his power and charged at his target. We understand now that Zeke Ezer isn't just the head of the R&D department at the company owned by that elf's father, he's also a 7th-ranked white hunter in South Korea. Of course, our protagonist had no idea about this. He realized that if he couldn't find the right moment to strike, he needed to create one instead. Yarong's strategy was simple. It was a full-force strike that just required dodging, so, when the enemy dodged, he seized the moment. There was no time to attack, but despite all this, our hero's staff was easily stopped by the elf, who told him that he was far more attentive than he realized. At the same time, he kicked Yarong back, watching him gasp from the blow, and remarked that he couldn't understand why this wasn't a real fight. Did our protagonist really think he could take whatever he wanted, or did he believe that technique would work? The elf called him pathetic, even saying that not only did he lose consciousness, but simply dropped his weapon. At the same time, he threw the staff back at our hero, saying that such weak tactics would not be tolerated again. He assured Yarong it would be better to give up on his dream of becoming a hunter. As the elf spoke, his aura was filled with anger and hatred, causing our hero to turn around and acknowledge that he didn't know why, but he felt a certain dislike directed at him. Nevertheless, he prepared to fight again. Zeke noticed that Yarong charged at him once more with the same move, but as soon as he noticed it, he realized our protagonist was just keeping his distance and continuing to shoot energy spears at him. Everyone understood this was enough, so our hero smiled and aimed his spear, or rather, rod, at the elf once more and declared this was just a warm-up. At that moment, even more energy charges blasted toward the elf. Zeke noted that this wasn't just some pathetic trick, there was real skill on display. The two onlookers understood this was more than just a fight between two individuals, it was a competition between two professionals. Sure, the boy, the main character, was up against a wall, but the scientist said if we were talking flaws, of course, there were some, because she pointed out a crushing disadvantage where she was much superior. She couldn't believe it. After all, this guy fought on rough terms against his uncle. What was his real disadvantage? As soon as she said this, we could see LV keeping up the punches against him. He said the lead role was already taken, even though this time, the main character held on to his weapon, which surprised the elf. Despite this, he continued to get hit, realizing he wasn't joking anymore. By this point, Yarong was lying next to the wall, having broken through it. Zeke mentioned that he wouldn't comment on the defeat because it had been predetermined from the start, but the process leading to it looked incredibly pathetic. The scientist noted as well that he had no basic knowledge, which was very surprising. See, Ram, what does that even mean? His sense of combat and skills were excellent, but here's a basic point. His method of attack or defense showed there was no initial training, so honestly, the scientist was disappointed because our hero could have gotten much stronger if he had gone through proper training. At the same time, the scene recalled his comments about how he had achieved everything on his own, and she understood what he meant at that moment, but the elf was already walking away from the main character, who was still looking down. He said he had seen many pathetic guys like him who had unique abilities but made no effort to develop them. Siam watched this with a strange expression, thinking this wasn't what she was trying to get at. At the same time, Yara, who had a broken helmet, heard that he should start paying for the measurements, or even better, admit his hopelessness because if he only relied on his abilities, it would be worthless. By this point, our protagonist got back on his feet, his left eye red. He didn't know why, but the elf's taunting enraged him. Why was he even talking about it? Didn't he despise lazy people? The elf found it interesting that he managed to stand after delivering the final blow. At that moment, our main character said he didn't care about any payment for the measurements. He only asked to fight again because now he would show the results of his efforts. The scientist and the elf girl couldn't comprehend what was going on at all. She urged him to understand that fighting to the end was good, but everyone had already received the data, so she asked our protagonist to stop fighting. He approached the microphone and requested that he listen to her because the measurements were over. He was good. He could go back and wait for the results. But of course, he had a different goal now. Someone talked to the elf, saying he honestly didn't know what he was aiming for. It would be useless for him. He didn't even understand that the results wouldn't change no matter how many times they fought. Or did he just want recognition? Did our hero just want to hear the elf praise his extraordinary willpower? Said that wasn't true because she was still very angry that everything was coming to an end, and he didn't take real action. But in truth, there was a reason inside him. No one taught him. He had started from scratch. Yet because of his outstanding abilities, he managed to fill the gap in his education, and when you added a wealth of experience from risking his life so many times, it allowed him to develop skills and achieve results that seemed miraculous. But in the end, Ya Rong still didn't consider himself special. He just pulled everything together and thought about the non-real hunters he had seen so far, but that particular elf was different. Zeke glanced at him and asked if it was really his fault, or if he'd just stomp on our protagonist before he could get mad. Finally, a monster capable of killing him, aside from his father. This was the first time he'd faced a real hunter, and he hadn't even realized how much youthful energy was surging within him. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. Why was their boss acting like this? Meanwhile, the elf girl noticed that the goofy way he'd assumed the elf's stance wasn't the same as she had seen before. His grip and center of gravity were weirdly off, swinging the pole around as if he were someone completely different standing in front of her. Once the fight kicked off, within the first second, our main character managed to scratch the elf's body. Despite dodging, everyone was on edge, waiting for the results, eager to see how it would all play out. The elf girl believed that, compared to everything else, he moved very simply and clumsily, yet there wasn't the slightest hitch in his movements. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't even fathom how much training he had gone through to do this. Obviously, our hero, still a bit of a kid, had spent his whole life watching his dad train on the street, imitating every move he made. He used every single skill now in this battle, recalling those moments when his father was still in good shape. Zeke, in turn, began to think seriously, too. He started to plan each move, not just dodging wildly and counterattacking. He figured that when he landed on the ground, there would be a hitch, and although there was no opportunity at that moment, he'd do as he wanted, face the elf's blow head on. As the elf regained his footing, he suggested they should keep it going as they were. Only then could their offer win. Had the elf actually boosted his self-esteem? "I told you, I just made it up," he said, claiming all the moves he knew ended there. So in the end, He'd only gotten the first number, but it still wasn't bad. We can see that Zeke Esser had a bad reputation among the anchors because of his tough personality, so while someone else was eyeing the scene, the elf girl rushed over, calling for her uncle, who told her to hush. Nobody dared to step out of line around him, given his overpowering skills. At that moment, he stepped forward and healed our hero, claiming he'd be fine, no consequences, and asked for our protagonist's name. As soon as the main character was killed, he could hardly believe it when he realized he might have met his son there. Meanwhile, we understand that Zeke Esser holds the white rank, the only one in the whole country, and he was also the best healer in all of Korea. Just as Zeke left the building, it was a chill evening, and he ran into someone who told him that if he was running late, he could just shoot a message because he was about to leave and grab a drink, or else they'd be late for the briefing again. A heavy-set guy asked if Zeke knew that when he was late. Everyone assumed it was his fault, but the elf pointed out he had things to do, which took longer than expected. The pumped-up guy laughed and asked if he'd been with some kid, noticing a scratch on Zeke's face, which puzzled not just him but also the elf. The beefy guy pointed at the scratch, causing Zeke to reveal it had no other explanation. The burly man adjusted his glasses, unable to believe it was true, because if that kid planned to enroll, he should be around 16, but at that moment, that Zeke was actually 17 and wanted to transfer to the Heroes School in winter. The guy thought for a moment and remembered something. He hadn't seen anyone pass the exam in his 3 years of study, but he still thought he'd somehow make it. Even though he didn't have a passport, he could also scratch Zeke's own face, saying young people were simply terrifying lately. The elf quickly asked him not to make her laugh, because even if he wasn't on the same level, there was no difference. After all, in front of them was Kangoo, who liked how Zeke claimed he was ranked 19th in South Korea and led Nick's first cleanup squad. He was 21 and had graduated from Hero High School a year ago, but of course, the elf was more interested, asking if he bought a new car since she hadn't seen it before. The guy replied to stop whining because it was the same model he ordered last time. He wouldn't throw money around anymore. Meanwhile, our hero was lying on a table. He woke up to find his wounds had completely vanished. He felt no pain, but the elf girl came into the room, asking what he was thinking. Did he really hope to beat her uncle? The main character shot back without a second thought that it wasn't like that. He was just hurt, making him flare up as he got grieved because he couldn't comprehend why her uncle would bully him. Hearing his curiosity, he asked if her uncle really was her uncle. She thought that was nothing unusual since he was her uncle on her mom's side. So, at the same time, she handed him a mug and asked what was up. Our character simply said there was nothing wrong. It looked like she had a pretty good relationship with her uncle based on how much he cared for her. She blushed a bit, asking what he was getting at, but all he knew was what he said was true. When he thought about it that way, it appeared some weirdo was trying to cheat his niece, which made his concern understandable. Meanwhile, Ace Ram insisted her uncle wasn't like that. He was very strict, a sentiment our hero concurred with, urging her to get away from him as soon as possible. But there wasn't enough time. Same scientist came into the room, only asking if Yorang's body hurt. If not, that was good, but if it did, it should have already healed, revealing that her boss was the best healer in Korea. This hit our protagonist hard, making him recall just how strong he was, and this wasn't even the elf's specialty. A smile crept onto his face. This concluded with the scientist saying everything was fine because his indicators turned out to be clear, showing them to him. Upon seeing them, couldn't believe they were what constituted a great result, causing Cam to shout at him to know his limits. We understand that a prerequisite for becoming a hunter is simply having indicators of B rank and up. Harmony is also critical. Even if your dexterity is high, if it doesn't match your health, it's all useless. You can't just be muscle. If you want to go solo, the rest of your abilities matter too. Prom said that among ordinary folks, there are some with a single indicator that can reach sea level, but everything changes when that indicator jumps to 2 or more. The muscle strength, health, and agility of people with a 3 rank indicator is 1 in 10, 0. Those who can fight solo have that ranking. With 3 B rank indicators, it's only 1 in 500, 0, and they can become top-class hunters. So, when the elf girl started sizing up our hero, she realized he had a B rank in muscle strength, and the other 2 indicators didn't matter much since he still had a crazy high level, placing him on par with that monster among the first-year students of the stripping department. What did he expect? While our hero continued checking out his stats, Tony wanted to throw in a joke. She mentioned that their boss, who fought him, didn't have any rank stats because of those 3, which left the main character director a bit confused. The score reflects innate abilities but doesn't show actual skills because even if someone has a rank indicator, without training, there's no difference compared to the S rank. Other factors matter too, like whether their technique suits the individual. Plus, skills and experience can't be measured by indicators alone. She also tossed in a cliche about how many hunters always try to fill their skill gaps with indicators. At that moment, she winked at Sarum, making her blush, but despite everything, Ye Yang put down the tablet and expressed her thanks while saying she wasn't too let down. She admitted she didn't know much about it. She just had a friend whose abilities were lacking compared to her own. The scientist figured that such people were rare, and he must have been quite well known. Our hero was obviously talking about his father, so he agreed that he was pretty famous. Right after their chat, Cam said the dimension was wrapping up, and their group was doing great. They might even meet up next weekend. Meanwhile, the scientists suggested they check out the production department, since the elf girl hadn't been there in a while. Cam looked a little perplexed by what the scientists were jabbering about. She didn't really have any friends like them, and her uncle probably wouldn't let her go. But the scientist just laughed, saying he'd permitted it. He mentioned that when our hero wakes up, he should inform the manager that this elf girl was his guest and to prepare weapons, no matter the cost. All this info was enough to shock Crom, who was already on edge. At the same time, we can understand that weapons and equipment are every hunter's dream. High-performance weapons and armor are crucial. Even top-notch abilities can't overcome low-quality weapons. So, as a hunter's skills grow, good weapons are necessary to apply those skills. Our hero scratched his head, saying he already knew that. But did he really need weapons? Crom wanted to insist that it was a must, but our hero questioned why he'd need weapons in school because, most likely, he'd be provided everything he needed. Ham just sighed, asking if he truly wanted to transfer out of the hero school because if he did, he was right. If it were just any regular school, that would be different since all schools offer equipment that meets the standards, ensuring students aren't discriminated against. Ryan wondered if there really was something off about the hero school, but why would a wealthy school not fulfill that role? Meanwhile, Youngin, a graduate of Hero High, replied that the issue wasn't about money. The school itself was different from the norm. If there's a significant gap in science and abilities, then prepping for a solid group is part of those abilities. The hero school has all the equipment and weapons, and students even prepare their own meals. At that moment, he realized that it didn't matter about skill. It boiled down to who was born into wealth with the best advantages. He even said if wealth was just another ability, there was nothing to discuss there. Young Yimin cleared her throat, adding that it was a point to consider, but even without money, there are ways to get good weapons. These hero schools have students who are likely to become better hunters or rankers down the line. Also, there are those looking to invest in those abilities. After all, if a student gets into a school, they receive various offers from businesses and wealthy individuals. After graduation, such hunters pay part of their fees or sign contracts to become the face of advertisements, in other words, sponsorship. She started feeling good about herself for getting a scholarship from the Dongsong group and being guaranteed a research position after retiring. Everyone applauded as if they didn't care much, but what she really wanted to say was how beneficial learning at that school had been for her. Thanks to that, many opportunities opened up for evaluating someone's abilities. But first, enrolling was a challenge, since transferring from another school was way harder than a regular entrance exam. Everything was possible with prep, and the boss said he'd help him prepare. Agreeing to everything, they just needed to head to the underground workshop. As soon as Young Yin smiled broadly, saying she'd cheer for our hero to get in, they approached the warehouse. Our protagonist decided something terrible was about to happen, so he replied that Tam mentioned something about not knowing how to help her uncle, but as far as Ye Yang understood, anyone wanting to transfer would come fully prepared. Som confirmed that it was exactly as he said, wanting to help pay for weapons. After saying that, Ye Yang threw her hands up to her face as if she was really touched by the gesture. They started heading down in the elevator, and the elf girl explained that it didn't matter how much money he would spend here. The most important factor was trust in the production process. Since the production department in the Chinan group had gained worldwide recognition for quality, there would be no issues there. By this time, they reached the floor named Furnace. Our hero commented that for that kind of money, other places would probably offer similar, but as soon as the gates opened, he saw it was definitely an underground forgent. The dungeon name was Stripping Boiling Abyss. The elf girl asked how that scene impressed him since only money wouldn't be enough to use this place. At the same time, our protagonist sensed something strange behind him. He started to stand, facing an eye monster, and jumped back. But honestly, he couldn't believe Zeke woke him up on the weekend and didn't want to go down in front of Argus Thunderhammer as senior titan, who claimed to be a monster and also the head of the department. So, the elf girls shouldn't just shield our hero from him anymore. Meanwhile, the older titan just plopped down on the floor, feeling at ease since he received citizenship in the Republic of Korea through a simplified process. As he lit a cigarette, he realized the person Zeke was talking about was right in front of him. Zeke even called him baby. Crom mentioned that a video was supposed to be sent from above with measurements of indicators, but I said I didn't know anything about their human toys, no data, no videos because the employees handled that, and today they didn't work. Say Rom was already upset, but I said it didn't matter, because if Zeke said to do it personally, then he could check it out for himself. He looked at our protagonist in surprise, and asked if it was really his weapon. As soon as our hero confirmed it, I said that was great and asked him to catch it. Our main character was taken aback by this, completely confused about what was going on. He shook his head, not understanding anything. He didn't know how things work for people, but to them, this was a common procedure. Again, for the sake of war, he didn't want to work hard to make weapons. He even thought he was a bit different from regular young boys. He had a look that said he was familiar with hunting. It felt like he was trained. So, he just asked to demonstrate his skills and abilities. Ham wasn't ready for this, but our hero just pulled out his weapon, saying it was time to find out what offers he had, not refusing. Meanwhile, was wondering where he even got the weapon he was using. Why, Ryong certainly didn't expect to not injure One Eye after all. He had definitely struck out. It was a pure needle strike. Of course, there were many monsters he couldn't take down with a single blow, but just now, he felt that, literally, if he hadn't known about the takeout, he'd have felt that this creature in front of him just wasn't alive. What kind of monster was standing in front of him? Ham, on the other hand, thought he was foolish for being so blunt. She was at a loss for another reason, understanding that the danger level of monsters was marked with stars. 1 star meant a flying praying mantis could kill a person, something an average adult man with a gun could handle. Monster with 2 stars, like a raptor class, could be managed by a trained military with firearms, but a danger level of 3, like a titanium monkey, required motorized infantry and armored weapons. If we talk about 4-star danger, like Democuris, to avoid numerous human casualties, residents must be evacuated as soon as possible while avoiding any collisions with the monster. After evacuation, aerial shelling or long-distance firing is necessary. The maximum the military could do is eliminate a 4-star monster. With 5-star level and above, modern military forces are practically powerless. Even if the battle is won, they'll have to expend huge amounts of firepower. The fallout would be too large. So if someone is capable of taking down monsters with minimal losses for themselves, they're squad hunters. At the same time, One Eye asked him to listen because he had a question. He wanted to hear the answer. We even realized that this was Argus of the Elder Titan tribe, whose danger level in the past was as high as 7 stars. He repeated his question again, but our hero continued to ignore him and just asked why he clung to the weapon so much. But Argus only said it was better to answer the question since he made it. He stepped on his cigarette and asked once more so our hero would fully understand the situation. 1. I asked why his own weapon wasn't in his master's hands. The elf girl was biting her fingernail, realizing that if this weapon was made by Argus himself, it must be at least a plus rank. The data was in the Russian Association, and anyone with the weapon was strictly monitored. Such weapons couldn't honestly get into the hands of smugglers. Did Yen steal it, or was it taken away? But our hero just said he didn't want to talk and even paraphrased his answer, saying it definitely didn't concern Argus. He yelled for him to tell her, but Argus just seemed to want him to do what he knew. He had already directed his attack straight at him, and at that moment, only one thought passed through Yen's mind, the thought of death. It would definitely be impossible to dodge. Should he take the blow? Maybe use the needle? But in the end, he realized more and more that his enemy didn't have any special moves. Could he use the SW? Well, the blow was definitely over. So, there was a third option, which was the last technique that Yang had seen from his father. He remembered that the law of force meant the bigger and stronger one wins in a head-on collision. But what happens if it's not a head-on collision? All you need to do is calculate the angle and position, so even if he didn't win, at least he could dodge. This was in Yang's third weapon. He was able to dodge a level 7 monster strike, which shocked Som beyond belief. He started looking for a weak spot where he could land a punch. The only place eyes he could hit was the eye that could be punctured with a needle, but of course, he couldn't do anything because Arges had already grabbed it with his own hand. Arges started squeezing it, but despite all this, Cam told Lee that she recognized he looked suspicious, so Arges behaved like this. It was still wrong to attack a person without knowing their circumstances, because he had to be aware that those who received citizenship under special orders didn't have the right to harm people unless their lives were in danger. If they violated this rule, they'd lose all civil rights and revert to being categorized as monsters. But at the same time, Arges let go of our protagonist's hand, wouldn't be bothered. He understood all this perfectly. But why was his weapon in the hands of the main character? Was it because Zeke woke him up on his day off? He still said that Prouse should ask him because he had the right to this weapon. He even promised him a good reward. He looked down at his hand and noticed it was an early one that hadn't appeared in 30 years since the last incident. By then, Cam was quite surprised. What kind of right was that? At the same time, Arges asked her if she knew why she was working for people in the first place. Starts off by saying that 30 years ago, a special hunting party raided him, but Arges retorts that this isn't true. This is just the story they tell each other, even though the people who attacked him couldn't even find him earlier because he was defeated by a single person. He cut off that person's hand and could have even killed him, but he didn't. Arges sensed our protagonist's eyes on him and mentioned that he knew who he was talking about, his father, who was still young. Meanwhile, we see the senior titan among the entire tribe of giants, having reached the pinnacle of power, close to eternal life. The number of such individuals is extremely low. There are only about 10 senior titans known on Earth. Even physically, they don't possess overwhelming power, but their true strength lies in their innate ability to craft weapons and equipment with special powers. Only the older dwarf titans can boast of these skills, but unlike the dwarves, who are friendly, the older titans view humans as worth communicating with. It was 30 years ago that the operation to capture Arges was in full swing when one of the groups encountered Colossus B, an automatic puppet of Arges. She was supposed to be around a 4-star level. The squad that arrived at the Titan's cave ran into a major snag. They couldn't contact headquarters because the communication magic was down, as if someone was deliberately causing interference. At that moment, they noticed Colossus getting closer. They wanted to bail, but had no choice but to fight back. They tried to block its blows and strike back, but it was useless. The Colossus dismissed their attacks with a single swing, knocking the warriors away. No one could believe it because there they were, an elite squad from a first-class organization that was proud of clearing dungeons, but couldn't handle what they encountered in Arges's lair. Knowing this was the 7th time their team faced such a situation, they had to run as far as they could. Even if they took down Colossus B, others would show up. Just as the guy was thinking this, one of his comrades told him to leave, knowing full well one of them wouldn't survive. At that point, the Colossus had launched its first attack, forcing the man to activate the potential trigger technique, unleashing all his power at once, and extending its effect. Of course, there was a downside. The skill user lost the ability to even move afterward. After taking a hit, the captain thought he'd already warned everyone they wouldn't survive. He couldn't defeat the Colossus alone, but he could buy time for someone to escape. They had a hope of winning, but just then, Arges himself came around the corner and spotted a few bugs. He hadn't eliminated people with no chance of survival, so the captain, holding a shield, charged at Arges, reasoning that if he threw all his strength into the fight, he could buy a bit of time. But he was gravely mistaken. With a single sword strike, he was incinerated, which only irritated Arges. This junk they called equipment, and the weak bodies, they all seemed so subpar. Who did these creatures think they were, calling themselves masters of the world? Arges thought the same thing. At that moment, he came face to face with another person who was pointing his staff at him and looking scared. Arges had no choice but to note there was a minimum of loyalty in the man, which surprised him a little. But at that moment, the magician, out of sheer fright, realized he couldn't do anything. Even the commander was struggling against this monster, and his magic was definitely insufficient. Just then, another person appeared, our protagonist's father, who said he had warned them that charging into that dungeon was reckless and pointless. He advised that gathering intel bit by bit was much safer before storming in to team up. What was the point of being ambushed by a monster? The magician didn't know who this young fella was, 32 years old. He explained he'd received their signal for help and was sent by the association as a volunteer. The mage looked at him oddly, but Argyung knew he was making a valid point. He said the armor was uncomfortable, new, and heavier than he expected. Just then, and above him was a Colossus that began to attack. He checked himself, and realized he was stronger than he had thought. Even so, he strived to deal with everyone. Up to that moment, Yu Song had just been an unknown hunter that hardly anyone knew. If he was a first-generation hunter, his name should have made history, but instead of recognition, he focused on saving others. That brought him fame, but after that incident, it all changed. That day, he faced the ear, and the whole world discovered who this great dream really was. Arges was shocked by the scythe, hadn't anticipated his colossus to fall in just one hit. Mog couldn't believe it either. This monster standing before them could only be contained by having their entire team combine forces. How was it possible to defeat it with a single blow? Despite his surprise, the only thing you knew at that moment was whether the mage had any mana left, because if there was, he didn't just need boosts, he needed things whirling around him. He asked to grab the two corpses and get out of there because they both were still alive. Arges was the only one against this idea. They couldn't just walk away, arguing they had no choice. But Young was convinced that without his permission, Arges wouldn't even lay a finger on anyone. Naturally, this sparked incredible aggression from Arges, his single eye covered in muscle because he was so enraged. When he started his assault on Young, the latter, in turn, simply closed in and collided with him. Sword swinging. 10 years had slipped by since they merged. Back then, hunters faced a peculiar problem. The released forces enhancing their physical abilities brought them close to superhuman levels. Plus, their technique of duplicating materials from dungeons sped up their skill growth. But unlike their impressive performance in copying weapons, they weren't using it effectively. The breakthrough came from human technology, a brand new combat system that redefined the standards of the time. A handful of hunters felt the need for it, explored the area, and trained. Young was one of those hunters, but all Arges said was that, compared to the others, he was on a completely different level. He knew how to use his powers, but if I had remembered that his weapon could at least keep up with his abilities, the situation would have definitely ended up differently. So, we can understand that back then, Yang was just an unknown hunter. He wasn't used to it and didn't have the chance to buy a top-ranked weapon. As soon as he saw that everyone was out, he thought everything was fine, but at that moment, AR just started saying that his technique was the most outstanding of everyone he had seen, but the hammer he was holding was of the worst quality. The strength had reached its limit. R said, "This is the end for you, son." But he just took the hit because it was a technique that Yeong himself would later spy on in the future, a technique called swell. The skill with which the hunter took the hit and used its power, physical strength, and perfect movement experience was all on a different level entirely. It was at that exact moment that everyone understood what true martial art in combat meant. Ars put the question to his listeners. After all, is there really nothing unusual in his story? After all, the heroes finally defeated the monster and everything, but at that moment, because of the technique that Yang used, the monster that was him died. His life continued not to him, but to our hero's father. However, it didn't kill him, so in the end, the dungeon clearing that the special squad had failed was declared their own victory, which many justified as a miracle. But after that event, something completely unexpected happened. A race of monsters that considers all other races inferior, so no one would ever bow to them, a race of Elder Titans. It was one of them, Arges, who voluntarily surrendered to humans and asked for shelter. The elf girl couldn't believe it because she knew for sure it was a monumental event. The whole world was stirred up, and then he was granted citizenship. There wasn't a single victim in that raid, although there were many injured, but in the end, he was guilty, so he had to work there until he served his full sentence for their company. And now it turns out that Arges was actually defeated by one person. It was certainly very different from what she had studied, but still, Ars said he was the one who made this pole, even though his father didn't ask for it, but he was a warrior worthy of this weapon. In turn, the main characters said he had never heard of it because all his life it seemed to him just a strong pole with no special functions. That's likely why his father didn't give it to the lender. Arges scratched his head and said it probably had to do with it being just a very hard stick that was good to turn. He mentioned it was very simple. Why did his father use a completely empty pole? He planned to give him a finished weapon, but only if he could get the material for the blade. At some point, the connection with him was cut off, and he couldn't come to him himself, so he sent what was already ready. Of course, Arges didn't know the details, but he thought it wouldn't be possible to finish this weapon. But that's not bad, because he asked to give them this pole. he will finish the job. It'll be a weapon not for his father, but for our hero himself. As soon as the girl or our protagonists came out the door, she asked him how he was feeling. He scratched his head a bit and said, "What's up with the NST? It seems the last grip wasn't too strong." They remembered her saying he didn't know how long it would take, but he would try to make the pull as quickly as possible. After all, you shouldn't rush a masterpiece. I must reach perfection by myself. They discussed that most likely by Wednesday it would be a day off. They'd be just fine because if so, then the girl at home would be preparing for the writing exam while conducting a mock test. But Yaren didn't really care, so the elf girl asked if it seemed that his father was an outstanding person. She didn't even consider that this track was completed thanks to him. Was he now retired and recovering in the hospital? But of course, why Rang didn't answer. He said he would go. The girl might not even give him a ride because he wanted to go for a walk and think for a while. They separated, and while the elf girl sat in the car, she read a brief summary of the case. Everything was written there. But even if what Arges was saying was true, then it turns out that those 5 legendary hunters from the special squad took credit for another hunter. It was hard to believe, but there was no reason for Arges to lie. And even if you looked at the abilities that Yeong had shown, it was pretty obvious his father was a unique master because there had been many such instances before. It was impossible to verify what happened in the dungeon. She pondered and realized there was a famous event, the False Dragon Slayer. You sung the best hunters of South Korea with excellent skills. Most of the achievements recorded in history were forged and documented using threats. She thought that for sure after Yang was injured, everything became known. She was able to find new information on the next website and realized that the false dragon slayer was most likely Yang's father. Well, while she was reading all this, she received a message about the midterm exam of the second semester. She was asked to check the grades for the practical exam, so at the same time, in high school, we learned in the dungeon clearing department that everyone was doing great because on weekends, no one could get a normal rest. A girl named Josa, 27, the homeroom teacher of class 1-2, a mentor in magic, asked for forgiveness. Well, of course, a person we already knew, said there was nothing wrong with this because it was her first time becoming a class leader, and he also needed to check the first-year students' assessment sheets. So as soon as Josa closed her laptop, she realized everything turned out even better than she expected. She meant about the work as well as the students' level. It couldn't be compared to when she was studying there herself. So she asked the teacher if she knew that the first place in the practical exam had been taken by that particular student. The teacher said that thinking about such a result was difficult to predict at all. So at the same time, as soon as she checked the results, she was shocked to realize that currently in the first year, there are 3 students who are called geniuses, but unexpectedly, all 3 of them have mixed blood. The first one was Choi Di, who has swordsmanship skills inherited from her father, a white-ranked hunter, as well as magical powers inherited from her elf mother. The second student was Anisha Serm, who has magical skills that even a full-blooded elf would envy. In the future, she will surely achieve great results and reach a high level. The third student, born from the union of a human and a dwarf, absorbed the greatest strengths of both races. His name was Tyr Basin, and he was called a rising star with the best physical characteristics not only in the hero school but also in the entire world. This is the same student who won first place in the stomach exams. Simultaneously, the teachers continued to express their confidence in Xiaogun's skills. They asserted that he is not inferior in any way to the rest. Still, usually, the first places in the exams are taken by leaders, and even though the difficulty level was low, he alone took first place. Another teacher, who had an iron grip on him, mentioned that sometimes individuals have their advantages, and physical strength isn't all that he brings to the table. The young teacher expressed concern because even though he has all the attributes to become a leader, he is not at all interested in interacting with other children. Not only were the kids from her faculty a little scared of him, but even others avoided him, as everyone understood that moving into the second year, one can't do much alone. It would be nice to have at least one friend to share thoughts with, but he doesn't seem to care. But at the same time, the same teacher said that perhaps one shouldn't worry too much about that because it often happens that kids aren't what they seem outwardly. He picked up his bag and remarked that this can be helpful sometimes. 3 days later, on Wednesday, many students were outside when they ran into Changgo. They were very scared because they spilled their drink on such a bully, but the only one who began to apologize was Young-gu himself. He was the first to say sorry because he didn't see them, just walking and lost in his thoughts. Of course, the students were terrified. Young-gu had no idea why he was having such bad luck because the only thing he missed was his mom. He remembered discussing with her earlier how tteokbokki is a deeply comforting dish. His mom, Sak Yubin, a Korean hunter working primarily in Europe and having a great reputation, often reminisced about her homeland, which she missed so much. Choi Gang himself felt a lot of sympathy for those endeavors. This is the atmosphere he grew up in, plus his personal outstanding qualities allowed him to enter the Heroes School through special competitions. So if we talk about his social struggles, he was quite sociable and would have been happy to chat, but he wasn't entirely fluent in Korean. Others pointed out that his pronunciation was poor, which is a common trait among introverts. Even though he knew a foreign language, it was still difficult for him to converse with foreigners. He disliked this aspect of his character, so his first semester passed in a haze of constant apologies from people who interrupted him. Choi Gang unwittingly acquired the image of a majestic wolf. His hobby was walking. At one point, he thought he might go somewhere, maybe check out the computer club that his mother also joined. He remembered that this was where you just play games and maybe order something tasty. As soon as he got there, he realized he didn't know what to do. He didn't even know how to sign up. He understood what was bothering everyone, so he decided to just go home. He was still alone, but at that moment, someone approached him. It turned out to be our protagonist. He pointed out that he was doing his registration incorrectly. You couldn't charge there, and the sign-up should happen in another place. He asked Younggu to follow him, promising to show him how to register. Once they got to the computer, it showed him what to fill out and what to leave blank. As soon as the registration was complete, he could go back to that machine, charge up, choose a spot again, and make his move. That would sort of be the end of it. Once he finished explaining, he remarked, after all, was he really a foreigner? Although he spoke Korean quite well, it was his first time in the computer club. But our heroes still had nothing to do because Crom was just late. He didn't even know it would turn into this. If he'd known, he definitely wouldn't have set his alarm for 9 in the morning. He'd rather go to the black market instead. We understand that, of course. In the very case where the royal jelly was located, there was a strange thing, a certain hexagon that didn't look edible, so he decided to check it out when he had time, now that an item related to the sky bees was up for sale, which was tantamount to a death sentence. The exchange that Cam gave him was in Kill Blood, one of the 3 disasters of the Agaran jungle, because Enel is a reptilian tyrant. In recent decades, numerous special units had been assembled to destroy it, but so far, not a single raid has succeeded. All they managed to obtain was a few silver scales and a bit of blood. Currently, hunting this creature is generally prohibited, and the prices for such items are literally sky high. Our protagonist decided he wanted to meet Crom at lunch and head to the black market in the evening, but now everything has shifted. At the same time, young Gala approached our protagonist and said there were no other seats, so he'd have to sit with him. This was another characteristic of introverts. He was constantly looking around and being cautious, even when it wasn't necessary. Our hero didn't mind. He said that lunch was also a day off, and he could sit there with him, especially since no one else would bother him. On the other hand, as soon as he opened the games, Younggu noticed there weren't any games that could be played only here. Honestly, he thought playing at home was 1,0 times better. He opened a game, and our protagonist noticed that it was a game he knew and the level was almost the same as his own. He apologized for bringing this up at their first meeting, but he also didn't have any friends who played it. If the other person was just gaming alone, why not try playing together? In the meantime, we see that in the center of Seoul, there are ruins known as scars. During the merger, a huge part of the city was destroyed. Almost all of Seoul. Most areas have been rebuilt over time, except for places close to the dungeons. The space between the wall containing the dungeons served to absorb impacts in case a monster got over that wall and an alert was declared. However, in the past 20 years, there hasn't been a single case of a monster escaping outside that wall on its own. They were transported by special vehicles, and at one point, one guy said that in moments like this, you realize the reality of things because his so-called colleagues hunt monsters and make money, while he makes barely anything driving a car. The girl next to him told him to stop complaining. If he didn't like it, he could quit and go back to work. That was Jo Yona, who had a special position in the Hunters Association, a former gold-ranked hunter who quit after losing her eyeball. Next to her was the same weirdo named Chang Wu, who also held a special position in the association, a former bronze-ranked hunter who was still intact. She told him he only had a license and no ability to find a decent team, implying he should have known he'd never get anything better than being an association employee. Of course, he didn't appreciate her saying it so bluntly, but at that moment, they felt something. The driver stopped and asked if the monsters could really come out of the back compartment. All Jo Yana did was tell him to call the center and say they stopped for a short check, because no matter what happened, the boss was nearby, so everything would be fine. If it weren't for her injury, she would have reached ranker status. But when he looked at the seat next to her, he saw a completely different woman, someone who probably killed the boss. He noted that the boss reacted pretty quickly, but knowing how to dodge isn't the same as actually doing it. She even checked all the lists in the trunk, but noticed the driver wasn't doing anything, so she ordered him to step on it if he didn't want to die. By this point, our heroes had already finished their game, and our protagonist was pretty worn out. They continued having lunch because the food there was delicious. Our protagonist said he didn't know they were the same age. He was just tall and muscular. What school do you go to? Anyway, young Gaul was a bit confused. He wanted to mention his school, but at that moment, they felt something strange. All the buildings started shaking. Everyone thought it was an earthquake, and the sound was like an explosion, which was incredibly surprising. They hadn't even noticed that a truck had crashed into their building. They figured the driver was just drunk, but how did the truck hit the wall? Shouldn't they have known first? At that moment, the girl on the roof realized that the alarm would likely go off in a few minutes, and hunters would come. She was sure she'd be caught, but she said not to worry, because she had already woken up the guys who immediately started getting out of the truck. It was the Horned Horror. Together with their crew, they were betting on their phones. At first, they thought 50 people would die, but they later upped it to 100. In the same instant, people began dying until our protagonist showed up. With one quick move, he smashed into the monster, throwing it back, and told people to run because they couldn't just stand there. The monster now in front of him was familiar. It had one horn, so it wasn't particularly dangerous. But things weren't so simple because another one with an extra horn was charging at him, throwing a motorcycle his way, which of course, he dodged. We all understand that a one-horned monster typically lives for about 5 minutes or 6 years, but most likely, they die with just one horn. Only about 8% of monsters have a second horn, which means longer lifespan and significantly greater strength. Yan noticed the monster was growling in front of him, clearly fast and strong, but not strong enough for our hero to handle. He thought about catching it, but the real issue was its strength. Compared to the tank he just fought, this thing was 3 to 4 times tougher. He could have managed the pole. At least he had some work gear, but he wasn't armed at all right now, so all he could do was dodge the two-horned horror coming at him. He had to improvise, so he looked down and spotted a road sign, turning it into his weapon. Armed with that, he prepared to attack, but as the monster approached, it jumped over him, putting him in a tight spot. The monster flew toward the people behind him, who couldn't move. Everyone should know that all monsters have a danger level. The difference in destructive power between 2 stars and 3 is massive. A regular person being in front of such a monster would be torn to pieces. Even very capable hunters would find it reckless to fight without special equipment. In terms of exceptions, a top-ranked tank with exceptional innate skills could resist such a creature. Right then, Chang'o halted the monster's punch with his own, capable of stopping it but struggling to deliver a third-rank killing blow. At that moment, he noticed our hero flying behind the monster and stabbing it right in the neck. They exchanged surprised looks. Shung and our hero. Yun then mentioned it would take at least a few more minutes for the rescuers to arrive, and while he heard the distress signal, this situation was unexpected. So, while they waited, people might die. We understand that Chang'o could have used a provoking cry, a basic technique any tank could use to attract monsters. Gun, who dreamed of being a hunter, was already prepared for someone to come from the rescue team, but he didn't want to ask another guy to risk his life alongside him when they were just playing video games. Our protagonist urged him to shout because before a real tank showed up, it should definitely have a technique to attract monsters. Gun hesitated, saying it would be dangerous, but the main character didn't care. He was going to fight alone anyway. He added that if he were Chang'o, he would have thought for himself, but at that moment, he wasn't alone. He made it clear he played well and wanted to protect people. Somehow, it turned out he began to pretend to be a hunter, which wasn't bad per se. He figured if that was the case, he needed to plan properly, insisting Chang'o probably wouldn't have the chance to use this skill. They stood up and realized it was time to test the skills they had learned together. All around the area, there were already plenty of corpses, and many people were hiding under the store shelves, ready to die. At the same time, Chang'ji used his provocative shout, which immediately attracted all the monsters. They were prepared to fight since the monsters were coming at them one after another, but of course, Chang'ji was strong enough. With his bare arms, he could throw them aside. While many were distracted, our hero continued to battle the monsters. He even noticed something strange. These monsters were picking up the bodies of people and throwing them into a truck. That's why there were no corpses on the street. As he was observing this, other monsters began to attack him. He figured that using normal hunting methods would lead to failure. He remembered discussing with Chong Golem how they both fought in close combat without cover or suitable gear. It was just a standard team game, and they wouldn't be able to give their all since they didn't have the right items and would just get in each other's way. So, They needed to distribute tasks. Chong would tank the weaker but more numerous enemies, while our hero would handle the stronger ones and those that were smaller. He kept throwing blows, comparing them to his needle technique, and using whatever he had, even a road sign stick. Still, nothing felt strong enough. With a needle, he could have taken them down in a few strikes. Of course, with such ordinary materials, he couldn't fight at full power, because aluminum bends easily, but he had a rough idea of how to tackle them, especially since Zeke was going toe-to-toe with his bare hands. Those monsters were fast, and he got light injuries that made it tough to move, like being soaked from the rain. Just then, he landed a kick on one of the monster's legs. In those terrible conditions, where a minute's mistake could be fatal, he fought to climb one more step. He kept throwing punches while dodging, recalling everything he learned training with the elf. He even used his fourth technique, which he had only recently mastered. But at one moment, he let his guard down. One of the monsters grabbed him by the leg and slammed him to the ground, causing intense pain. He was badly hurt. Blood was running from his mouth since he wasn't wearing any protective gear, and the damage was significant. He thought he might look a bit pathetic, but he had no choice. It was no fair fight against monsters, so he wasn't too scared. He knew that Chong-ji would come and toss the monster back any moment. He remembered that luck was also a part of teamwork. Meanwhile, many people sitting in offices and still safe were astonished that their heroes had managed to take down dozens of horned horrors without any equipment. They thought it was incredible that they managed to film it, with a college student, a president, and a dungeon researcher discussing it. Another guy clarified that they hadn't fled because the first one was too scared but felt that the two down there were too strong, even if they seemed younger than them. Considering the number of dangerous grades, they were experienced enough to achieve a gold rank. They had to be students from a warrior school or complete beginners who hadn't made a name for themselves. In any case, it didn't really matter anymore, so they decided to upload the video right away, as it would be too late otherwise. He could already see how that video would get at least 1 million views, maybe even 10 million. Young Gual, who was also seriously injured, thought that the rescue team would arrive much earlier. He didn't believe that they could deal with all the monsters together. At the same time, he was distracted by Y, who said he looked cool but asked if he could help him get up. When they helped each other up, they acknowledged their injuries. Youngle remarked that their protagonist had managed to defeat 2 monsters, but our hero countered that he had fought 9 at once and even helped him with those 2. Once they were done complimenting each other, Youngle asked which school our hero attended because he thought the rumors were different from reality. It was mentioned that schools in Korea weren't worth paying too much attention to, but he didn't want to speak ill of our hero's school. Why Ryan knew he was probably a high school warrior, which was safe to assume. He then asked Jang Gu's rank, but Jang Gual wasn't sure since he hadn't been around many people yet. Even though he had taken a couple of tests, he didn't feel they were related to his real abilities and thought about half the students might be better than him. Our hero reflected on that. If someone was better than Chong-gol, then he wouldn't be accepted into the hero school. Just then, they noticed there was another monster in front of them on one of the trucks. It seemed the tank's skill hadn't affected it, but they should have been worried not about the one on the truck, but about the one inside. Young Gall thought they could easily kill the one outside before it caused any real damage, but strange sounds came from the truck. That monster was likely being dragged away and eaten. We also learned that the horned horror belonged to a group that lived in a tribal society. 2 of the horned ones played the roles of elder parents, acting as the leaders of a small horde, usually no more than 10. They unite with other tribes to boost their strength, but this population growth has limits, especially in the harsh dungeon world. The horned horrors sit at the bottom of the food chain, their numbers controlled by strong predators. However, mutants sometimes emerge, growing 3 horns, and becoming not just leaders but kings commanding armies of hundreds of thousands, if not thousands. So they were up against a horned Rex horror with a 5-star danger rating. In that moment, the Rex charged and sent Samora flying aside, then jumped with incredible speed. He came down so hard that he shattered our protagonist's weapon. Young Gu initially tried to stop the monster, but it was way stronger. It tossed him aside like nothing, crushing the sidewalk. At that moment, they realized they were lacking time, and that they were just 2 geniuses Swo guys who could achieve great things, but not in their current state. Determination, strength, courage, and intuition alone wouldn't cover the massive gap in experience and power, but still, they fought on. Our hero got back up. The monster launched its attack again, hitting the target perfectly, but of course, just the day before, Yong had lost himself. Few people knew about him, and not a single person in this world knew what he was hiding. At that moment, his eyes began to glow purple, and his whole body seemed to radiate energy. Flashback to 11 years ago, confession made at a press conference, where Yam admitted to his many past mistakes and wanted to apologize. These words significantly changed the world's perception. 12 hours before the Battle of Sea began, Rum was confused because she had discovered the whole truth on Sunday. Yusong was the main culprit in the dragon-slaying case, mistakenly seen as a hero. Back then, everyone thought Yang had subdued Arges with help from the members of the Gabak group, but the tension in their relationship had later been revealed. At the time the newspaper was printed, the investigation was still ongoing. For 2 days, Rum had been going through all the records, unable to shake off her concerns. She constantly drank coffee, thinking that if our hero's father was falsely accused, then this person must have lost all strength to resist. Many wanted his position and had ruined his reputation, shackling him in this way. What she couldn't understand was how her father had been brought down. They framed him after he was accused of an attempt. The charges and testimonies presented shocked everyone. Public opinion was overwhelmingly against him. Even if you took into account the alleged evidence, there was no changing people's minds. If Yang were in his shoes, she would have definitely resisted until the end, but Euron's father was not like that. He accepted the accusations, without even trying to deny them. After a public opinion conference in Miku Costa, he was branded a fraud and a murderer. The Lion Girl couldn't believe it. How did this happen? Even under threats, he should have held his ground. Though she didn't know the general situation at that time, it was clearly not in Young's favor. She thought it was unfair and was sure something was off. She noticed Wikipedia stated he didn't have a family, which baffled her. According to the data, they weren't related but were rather like protagonists. Just like Yang, she wanted to investigate further, thinking perhaps Yang started making accusations to protect the Y. At the same time, he couldn't comprehend what was happening to his body. When the demon attacked him, all he could do was improvise, knowing his body could move. In that moment, he realized that was more than enough. After landing one hit, the demon realized he was at a disadvantage and felt the danger from our main character. He wanted to attack him again, but as soon as he was on top, he noticed a counterattack that drove the demon into the wall. Yan understood he hadn't beaten him yet, but 2 more punches should definitely do the trick, especially targeting the chin. Our main goal now was to finish this fight as quickly as possible, otherwise, he just wouldn't have the time. But right at that moment, his cell took over, and the demon charged him. The demon came flying at a crazy speed, but he was pinned down by a truck thrown by Chongo. This was why they had separated during the fight. Each had a different role matching their abilities. Chongo's job was to hold off the opponent, even at the cost of injury, so now he would unleash his strongest blow, and both our hero and Chongam were ready to risk everything. They justified their risks as the demon's skull shattered from the inside. While Yungle helped our hero up, Yang managed to laugh it off a bit, saying they did a great job. Less than an hour later, shocking news spread worldwide, impacting the 2 guys significantly. This had profound implications. While Jung reminisced about his childhood in a small town, he recalled when he got injured, and they tried to disinfect the wound. He wanted his father to stop, believing it could heal itself, but Jung insisted that even a small wound should be treated. Leaving it alone could lead to more pain later. In that moment, he thought about his father's injuries while fighting monsters. Didn't it hurt when he had blood all over him? But Young, with a big smile, said he was scared when he got hurt, too. But he endured because if he didn't fight, others might get hurt. In that moment, our main character had one thought. He wanted to become just like the person in front of him, his father, but he understood that Yang himself wouldn't want such a future for his son. He always warned him that he couldn't feel guilty for wanting to be a hunter. Maybe that's why he forbade it. Yaram believed that when he grew up, he would understand why his father didn't want him to become a hunter, but at that moment, it felt impossible. This was probably a dream. When the protagonist woke up from his bunk, he recognized a very familiar situation, but then noticed a strange person sitting next to him. This person said someone was likely aiming at him. Of course, Yaren couldn't help but be scared. He turned around and saw Zeke peeling apples, admitting it was partly his fault that last time. Our hero quickly decided to get up and ask what the elf was doing there, but as soon as he sat up, a sharp pain shot through him. Zeke told him not to move suddenly. Treatment could be tricky after such an injury. He would only be able to move his hand in about a month, so Zeke urged him to focus on resting. Yaren wanted to ask a question, knowing it might relate to his father. Zeke anticipated this and confirmed they had worked together. It was Yang, who had taken a very abrupt action that had surprised Zeke. All this was meant to make an apple, which ended up in his hands. Our protagonist looked at Zeke, confused about why Zeke was staring at him like that. Did he think our hero was going to attack him? Zeke replied that this wasn't the reaction he expected, but our hero pressed on, getting a bit snarky, saying he didn't know what the elf was waiting for. He was just going to ask if he knew his father, because today's Zeke seemed completely different from last time, prompting our hero to conclude that he didn't just know him. The main character was wiped out, and with an incredibly aggressive expression, he told Zeke to get out or he'd slice off his hand with the knife he was holding. This was probably the reaction Ed expected from Zeke, because that was the most fitting expression, so if it hurt, he apologized. But Zeke shrugged it off, saying no worries. He was almost right, though he expected a more emotional reaction. Yan chimed in that for someone to elicit that kind of emotional response, they would have had to show up 2 years earlier to really grasp what was going on. Back then, his head was full of thoughts about the people who harmed his father but did nothing about it. Once, he even wanted revenge for everything, but now he couldn't even tell if his mind had changed because he had just shifted his priorities. This was all way too much. Even for him, he didn't quite reach Zeke's level yet. What could he do? Should he provoke them into responding? The only thing he could do was cover the medical expenses and just keep living until drugs were banned, which was his main goal now. He didn't know when he'd get there, but he'd do everything possible to make it happen, so even if someone tried to stop him, he would find a way around them. Zeke threw up his hands, admitting his plans weren't meant to interfere with our protagonist. He just had a few questions, like why Young's own son wasn't listed in the documents and who looked after him after his mental breakdown. The main character said he raised him alone. Did Zeke really think he was the only one bothering him with such questions? Of course, our hero had grown up alone. As soon as Zeke listened, he asked if he'd heard about Doogie Yaren, mentioning it was probably a foreigner, so he didn't know them. The elf clarified that it wasn't a human name but the official name for the Dragon of Destruction, the very source of the poison that afflicted his father and the most dangerous creatures still roaming their world. This info definitely surprised our protagonist because, even decades ago, humanity was living in fear of them. For years, both people and other races built walls of protection against these monsters, and thanks to the dungeon hunters, they no longer threatened human safety. The only exceptions were a few creatures that could still break through the walls, strong beasts, just like dragons, something stronger, smarter, and more cunning than anything in this world. The ancient race had been hostile to humans, but among strong monsters, dragons were particularly dangerous. They didn't just look down on humans, they viewed them as mere objects for entertainment and exploitation. Yet, at one point, they underestimated the strength of the hunters and their capabilities, thinking they wouldn't need to wipe out humans, since they would merely watch, waiting for society's collapse to raise people as livestock while acting like lords in exchange for safety. Yan thought they should have been grateful for their feudal plans, but Zeke said the only truth was that the hunters had survived and figured out how to defend against the dungeons. Once their plans failed, the dragons decided to intervene directly, intimidating people with their unseen strength. At that moment, our protagonist's father, a hunter, showed up and proved that dragons could be defeated with the right strategy. It was thanks to him that dragon hunting became successful worldwide, and from then on, everything changed. Yen mentioned he knew what happened next. They just hid in the dungeons afterward, but Zeke countered that they simply changed tactics. Those dragons were very cunning. They could also take on any race's form. They realized they could only defeat humans through brute strength. So, they began altering their appearances and blending into society. This was a secret, of course, but Zeke wanted to share it with our protagonist because he was Young's son and was aiming to be a hunter. Zeke stepped closer and told him that Dugoni was the dragon leader. His father had been hunting until illness took him down. He said they needed to catch him to create a medicine that could help his father recover. Anyone willing to do this would have to become much stronger to rise to the top as a hunter, and the elf would surely provide them with a chance to punish Dugoni. As their conversation wrapped up, all that was left in our protagonist's room from Zeke was a fruit basket and a business card. Looking at it, he recalled their talk, where Zeke said if he didn't believe him or couldn't decide, he should just live as if he hadn't heard anything or had forgotten it all. Yoni exhaled and questioned himself, wondering if he really couldn't make a decision. If it was true, just participating could lead to death, but he wouldn't back down. Zeke, still standing beside our hero, remarked it wasn't entirely up to him to decide, pointing out that he had to level up to earn that right. Dragons were extremely treacherous and hid deep within society, wearing many faces. Even if they found proof and made it public, it wouldn't matter until they personally took them down. After all, the future unveiled would just lead them to hide away again, leaving only the horrors of distrust behind. So they needed to cut them out quickly, secretly, and decisively, as if trying to extract a foreign body using a scalpel. They couldn't leave the dragons a single chance to escape or resist. They needed to destroy them with one blow in the weakest spot. Zeke had started preparing special teams years ago to catch Dagoni. They were all worthy and reliable hunters capable of taking down a dragon, but if Yen's skills weren't enough to fight them, then no matter how much he wanted it, he wouldn't have a place on the team. One weak link could not only jeopardize the plan but also put the entire team at risk. Meanwhile, our protagonist realized they probably wouldn't be able to wait for him much longer. Zeke was already turning to leave and mentioned they couldn't even accurately identify that dragon. He could only guess it was about 2 years old, but the sooner they acted, the better. The main character realized that his circumstances wouldn't matter to the elf if everything was set, and it didn't matter what the elf thought of him. If the elf didn't believe him, they might never meet again, but he could promise one thing: whether the elf joined him or not, the elf would simply destroy that very dragon. Our hero replayed these thoughts in his head. As soon as he started washing up, he realized what it meant to have a way to cure his father. Of course, Yang was beginning to doubt this, shocked by such sudden news. Maybe it was worry or fear that he wouldn't be able to participate, although that wasn't the final answer yet. After looking at his reflection in the mirror, he realized that he would definitely be on the team, whatever happened. He felt an incredible joy. He finally had a chance to grab an opportunity that hadn't been seen before. It was possible that for the first time in his life, he felt such a strong desire that filled his heart to the brim. At that point, he turned around and noticed that a woman had entered his room. She saw that Yang was awake and asked if there was any pain in his arm or elsewhere, but she decided she would tell him the details of his treatment more often while hiding because, at first, there would be slight discomfort in the muscles. After all, they had reassembled his arm. Ryan was surprised by this, so the woman explained that when the ambulance arrived, his arm was in serious condition, just a little more, and it would have had to be amputated. But during the operation, a high-ranking leader joined them and reassembled his arm. Our hero then decided to ask about another patient who was likely with him. He said that, as far as she knew, that patient was discharged the same day because he had a pretty high recovery rate. Rang was stung by the fact that he was discharged the same day. How long had he really been in the hospital anyway? But as soon as he thought about this, the girl only asked for a photo. Ryan was obviously a little shocked by the request, but wouldn't it be okay for him to get out at all? The girl said she could take one but warned him that it would be better for him to leave through the main entrance because the hospital was now full of reporters wanting to interview him. Our protagonist hadn't the faintest idea why a reporter would want to interview him, but at that moment, the girl showed him a video where he was most likely the one who prevented a terrible accident that shouldn't have happened again because there would have been several hundred victims without him. Everyone went crazy, curious about who he was, where he came from, and she handed him a bag, saying it was a package from his friend who said everything inside was necessary in case he didn't want to be recognized. Our hero smiled, thinking most likely there would be equipment that granted invisibility, but when he opened the bag, he saw just a climbing rope. As soon as he got out of the window, the girl who took the photo with him said she would post it on Instagram when he became a hero, a famous hunter. Meanwhile, our hero was sitting in the same car where Cam was, so, our protagonist asked if there was really nothing but a rope was necessary so that his identity wouldn't be revealed. At the same time, she shared that she went shopping, picking up his clothes and shoes by eye, and also bought a smartphone because she thought his was broken. She looked at Yarong, who was very happy with the gifts and held the bag out to her, asking her not to cry, but she told him she just couldn't believe everything she read. She didn't even know where to start or what to ask first, surprised that such a thing happened right where he was. She never thought a monster would be there, but Yan said life is just a chain of events. But where did the two of them go? Aram held her forehead, saying they only had time today so they could rest, and to get their clothes in time, they needed to take measurements today. Our hero was already wearing clothes, but Am said she was so happy for Yarong because the best top-level heir in the world decided to sew armor for him. We understand that there are only 3 types of costumes that depend on the quality of the hunter. The first is, of course, fabric that is sewn from material with the lowest physical abilities, but with various techniques. The fabric is easiest to replace with protective properties. Most often, these are used by healers and magicians. The second type is metal. Such suits are very strong, but the problem is their weight. Strong, high-quality metal is tough to handle if you don't have extraordinary physical data and health. Somewhere in the middle is a leather suit not too heavy or strong enough For long distances, like our hero, it would be just right. Yang just smiled and said it was true because he recently found out that fighting with his bare hands is very unpleasant. Meanwhile, while our protagonist connected his new phone, Sam asked how he even managed to destroy it. She had a jerk. After all, how could they catch both of them? For those like her, there is a video of how he defeated them. The girl, however, said that the video was shot only to the middle point. All that is visible is how they destroyed the one-horned and two-horned monsters, and the final battle with the 5-star monster. This clearly made it obvious to our protagonist that this monster was extremely strong because even if he or Callan were fully prepared to fight it, they still wouldn't be able to defeat it. But where did the energy that flowed through his veins come from? While he was thinking about it, Cam wanted to hear his answer, asking why he wasn't saying anything. How did he manage to do it? The only thing Yang said was that he didn't know anything himself and didn't have another explanation. Graham couldn't believe it because such a monster could only be destroyed by professional hunters fully trained as part of a squad. It seemed like the main character didn't take it. Did they really manage to take it down together? As soon as our character looked in her direction, she immediately turned away, then told him to be careful. Now they wouldn't give him a quiet life. At first, Ryan thought he saw the reporters, but Psalm said they weren't the only ones. He didn't seem to understand that both of them were in earnest right now, but the other guy was already completely exposed. He hadn't even been offered any interviews or programs in the last 3 days and hadn't said a word about our main character. This surprised our protagonist, but Cram continued saying that he was asked to at least name it. He replied that without his consent, he simply could not. That's when we realized that as soon as both of them finished the last battle, Yang had one request for Youngle, asking him not to talk about what happened there, as well as about Rang's identity. He definitely didn't want to be recognized all the time. All this news from the elf girl certainly made our hero happy, so she realized that they probably became very close friends. The only thing she said was that nothing could happen while he was taking exams at school. Our hero had been in contact with the principal this whole time, so he asked Crom if there was any reason nothing should happen before the exam. Crom exhaled again and said he had learned a bit about the exam, and it would be much more difficult than he thought. After all, he was at the beginning. If you look at the level of competition over the past 5 years, then the probability is 1 to 1. This only applies when there are applicants. Our hero reassured Crom that he didn't need to worry about such a small number. Any student would be much weaker than him. Crom was getting nervous again and pointed out that he didn't mean it was about his abilities. Once they got out of the car, Crom added that he hadn't said anything because his abilities were better, no debating that, but he wanted to emphasize that it was different for those who couldn't complete the exam on their own. At first, our protagonist wanted to argue that wouldn't be the case, but he realized that some would likely join groups for the exams. Crom was right because, in recent years, most of the students accepted into the school came from families of hunters, either with one parent or both being hunters. Naturally, all the parents know each other, so they agree in advance about which team to form. Members of such groups who got in, especially in the last 5 years, were basically guaranteed to succeed. So if our hero tried to tell everyone he was the guy from the news, he'd immediately become a target and the main competitor. Of course, the hero's school didn't allow for this, but it would be better to enroll on special grounds due to monster-slaying merits. But he didn't need that, because if most, if not all, did that, it meant someone only entered for money. He promised that he would definitely break through and be accepted. Initially thought everything would be fine and wonderful, but when she looked back at our hero, who couldn't find a toilet, she felt the situation hadn't changed at all. So the only thing she said was that she'd go first and wait for our main character as soon as he changed. It was at this point that Cam had already approached one of the employees and said she had an appointment with the president. But as soon as the girl at the desk contacted the president, he told Sam to forgive them because he had urgent business today. The girl at the table apologized, saying she wouldn't pay Crom compensation, but even so, Cam was furious because she said the problem wasn't with her exams for the hero's school need to be taken in 2 months. How could they cancel the meeting and not even inform her? But at that moment, the door opened, and a man stepped out, making Sam realize she had seen that face somewhere before. Turned around to look because recently hunters have often said that young people have become entirely different now. Even if they're right, hunters who came later always had better conditions than their predecessors. They had tactics for attacking monsters developed during the first wave, risking their lives, plus more advanced equipment and technology. However, The term current youth referred to those already born into good conditions. Surviving hunters created families and gave their kids everything they had, which turned out to include not just abilities, but also the upbringing they received very early on. If one were to ask about the peak of such a blessed generation, most hunters would point to Yun, who was 18. She said it didn't matter to her specifically, as the most critical thing was that she'd be a first-year student at this school. She asked if she knew who she was. Didn't she? Replied that Sunbi was the president of the Hero High School's court board. Then T mentioned that the firm's president was her uncle, and she had urgent matters to attend to. She asked for help, but understood the displeasure about the cancelled meeting, so she had a brilliant idea. She mentioned that the meeting wasn't cancelled because of her, it was just that Cam conceded to her. Of course, everyone knew that was complete nonsense. Everything she said about Cam conceding and all the winnings going to her. She realized that this meant he held the position of president of the Hero School's court board, as well as Hun's lousy personality. By this point, when she was feeling pretty upset, our protagonist showed up and said it looked like a T. They couldn't help it, so that girl thanked him for understanding. But just then, the main character said he'd have to tell her to stop plotting there and get away from them, which immediately shocked her. Sunbi started saying it was rather rude. So who was standing in front of him? Rom wanted to start the characters, but then realized something hit her, but there were no results. The only thing the guy said was that at that time, Cam didn't have a voice, so why did she decide to open her mouth? He didn't remember asking her anything. He told her to mind her own business and sit quietly, but our hero immediately shared what he knew about himself. He said his name was Yuya Rong, he was 17 years old, had blood type A, and lived in Seoul. He even mentioned his favorite food and his weight, so Cam thought that would be enough. But most importantly, he said he was currently preparing to transfer to the Hero School. Honestly, he was a little disappointed because he didn't think there would be typical high school trash or bullying just like in the army. Our hero also felt like his mind was being taken over at that moment, but Sunbi said she was sorry because she didn't really dislike people who threw harsh words, even if it only applied to who had the right to do so. If he was preparing for transfer, then a defective product that didn't meet standards at all simply didn't have a right to do so. In turn, the main character just went and delivered a direct attack to her left eye, destroying the entire left side of her face. He said he understood what was going on, because he just tried to use what he learned. He didn't know if she liked it or not, but he understood everything. Sunbi felt the same skill he had used on her had now been applied to him. A strange person came out from the other door. It was Han Sang-woo, a former hunter who was currently just an armor designer. He said that girl was just a bit of a nuisance because he was busy, and that friend of his had to arrange some concerts. It hadn't even been a week since he worked there, and there he was seeing her father turn over. The designer simultaneously had to ask for forgiveness for his niece, because she was used to creating what she wanted. Sao Ram, in turn, said there was no need to apologize because she was very happy. If this whole situation was due to the stubbornness of the student council president, then she thought they could easily solve the problem. Everything was right. Everything Ono just saw was even much worse than her. I expected it, so it was clear that the girl had a strict edge and skills. If someone like me stood in front of her, they wouldn't even register him. At this point, said he needed to step away for a minute. What does Sunbi actually do at school? She doesn't seem like your run-of-the-mill student council member, so Sam replied that she was the student council president. In other words, the strongest of all the Hero School students. This was a surprise to our protagonist because every student in a specialized school gets a temporary license, which allows them to gain experience in preparing for professional activities during low-level raids, without school classes, and under the supervision of a professional hunter. But there are exceptions, like high school heroes. Inside the school, students with exceptional grades form groups recognized by the unofficial cleaning team. They get the right to independently manage and express their opinions in the board meetings, and can also team up with professionals for raids on monsters rated above 5 stars. For this reason, there's no official team of pros among hunters called future rankers. Seirum added that according to the rules, it's supposed to be like that, but the girl in front of him was just a sophomore. Our hero thought this was pretty wild, but Siam replied that this girl had just taken the presidency from the person who held the position before her. Yan couldn't believe it. Soam said she had advocated for prioritizing skills accessible from the first semester of the second year. As soon as Gun Sunbi entered her second year, she stepped in and pulled her blade, causing the biggest stir in the school's history. She started challenging all the high school students on the council and, by the semester's end, had defeated everyone, including the president. Thanks to that, she became the youngest president in history. By the time their conversation ended, Sunbi had simply turned her back on her uncle, telling him to stop grumbling because it was time for her to go. Se-rum thought it was great that everything had worked out well for them, but right then, the main character said he wanted to make a bet with Sunbi too, because he heard that a student from the school was pretty strong. She wouldn't just mess around with those younger than her. Ryan just wanted to solve a problem because if he lost, he would step in. Sei asked him to chill, but it was too late because Sunbi wanted to know the conditions in case she lost. A smile spread across the protagonist's face as he said she was quick to get it because he had heard of a technique called taking steps away among hunters based on ancient arts. The winner would be the one who retreats first, because if he didn't, he'd concede. Today, it was clear to everyone that this method wouldn't cause any damage. It trains sensitivity, agility, and technique, one of the training methods often used. So, our hero said if she lost, next year when he staged the hero's school, he'd take her spot as student council president. Se-rum thought the main character was nuts because how could he know about this method, and the president would never agree if she was in her right mind. But, of course, she found it all amusing, so she accepted the bet. By that point, they were already in the workshop, ready to start the battle. The aura coming from them was intense. From a not-so-distant past, Se-rum continued to tell our character that he was nuts because he still had a chance to back out. The chairman was rational, everything could be resolved with a simple talk, but he was completely healthy. What did he think he would do with such a hand? After all, even if he won, she would never hand over the student council president position to him. All I'd say was he wouldn't win, because even if he was perfectly healthy, he still wouldn't have a chance. She was just too strong. Se-rum couldn't figure out if the protagonist was betting because he knew he'd lose, so this time spent would definitely be wasted. The main character said he understood that it was concerning but asked him to just trust him because, in the end, it would definitely be a good deal. Ham was looking really down at the moment, doubtful of what could be gained from a duel that had a known outcome. He wasn't planning to lose on purpose to win her favor, but as soon as the image sank into her mind, she realized he wasn't stupid enough to try something like that. While Siam was trying to figure out our hero's plan, the stylist approached her, asking for forgiveness because Tom had nothing to say. He was just lying. He knew his niece should be leading the student council, but instead of being friendly, she only said that what mattered most was that he should apologize again to Cam. Cam used to say that the situation boiled down to being unreasonably stubborn, but the stylist didn't think so because he didn't know much about the person who came along with her, yet he was sure he understood his intentions. It was at this moment we could see what was unfolding in the fight. The girl said our hero should have anticipated this, as she wasn't going to use both hands. Only to be fair, Jan smiled in return and said it didn't matter to him, he'd just use it as an excuse if he lost. The moment he said that, he noticed the girl appeared right in front of him. Both onlookers were surprised for different reasons. Se-rum was caught off guard because the punch wasn't strong, but shockingly fast. She hadn't even noticed when the girl got so close. The only reason for her surprise was the attack speed. Because shadow sparring is defensive training, you have to take risks to make contact with your opponent. However, Handon didn't show any hesitation. It was just an attack, both in speed and her endless pride. Se-rum began to realize that Han couldn't even see the girl's movements because if it had been her replacing our character, she definitely wouldn't have been able to react to that first attack. At the same time, the stylist, unsure if it was even appropriate to ask, wondered if the same person who fought with his girlfriend was now preparing to transfer to the warrior school. Despite the information Se-rum shared, he doubted that our character would be particularly talented. Everything he was seeing on that stage now just surpassed his expectations, because 10 years ago, he too had been an adventurer filled with energy, which is why he understood Yen's intentions. He realized it wasn't out of pride or to show off, he just wanted to learn more because Han was stronger than most kids her age. If she gained more experience and skill, no one would doubt she'd be strong like some of the lower-ranked fighters, and he simply wanted to witness that. The distance he had to cover to reach that point was unbelievable. By then, the battle was raging because Han herself didn't expect the outcome. She recalled how long it had been since she felt this way after entering the school, and thought no one could evade her for so long. She was impressed with him, thinking he wouldn't hold out, only to realize there was someone in front of her who was hurt more than just his arm, and likely wasn't even at 100% health. Wai Rayong, on the other hand, couldn't comprehend how he knew what he was capable of, given that he moved quite fast while battling the horned horror. Over the last 4 days, she'd watched his fight hundreds of times, claiming she was a fan of the famous hero, Mr. Unknown. At that point, she proposed a draw, suggesting they continue their match when he returned to school, allowing him time to recover. She even considered that she wouldn't let it end there and could go with her uncle, as planned. But of course, she didn't have the chance to finish because, as soon as Ran caught his breath, he couldn't believe her confidence and sharpness. He thought he didn't get what was going on because he didn't want to agree to a draw, reminding them he had to have the president of the student council position. Our hero wasn't planning to give up, asking them to stop wasting time and continue from where they left off, because he felt he understood everything now. All three of them thought he was bluffing and doubted it would work out. Even if he didn't continue, the chances he had let slip away would be the best outcome. Han remarked that it was a shame because she liked ambitious people, but his actions weren't ambitious, they were just foolish. Disappointed, she smiled as he charged forward. Everyone was taken aback because he had closed the gap quickly, trying to kick her the same way she had done to him. Ram was delighted because he knew he had been holding back all this time, but the stylist thought he was mistaken. He didn't believe they could just say he was holding back. The stylist was completely wrong because he was not just trying to measure his strength against Han. They only sparred for a short time, but in those moments, he perfectly read her movements. Winning or just surviving wasn't the point. He had asked for this chance to dissect his niece's skills. From childhood, Yang worked as a smuggler, following one rule: never make unprofitable deals. So, as he pressed on against Han, step by step, he advanced, wanting to see more moves from her. Everyone needed to understand one thing: technique isn't just about landing a hit, but about optimizing your body for the goal through effective movements. Mastering such skills takes a lifetime of experience, using successes and failures passed down through generations. He knew that despite her remarkable talent, there was no way she could defeat him alone in just a few years. Her growth had been steady, but she hit a wall at 17 when her body's growth slowed. This wall had to be broken to reach a higher level. Continuing his assault, he asked why she hesitated and didn't attack. She must have heard this before. He was certain he'd end up at the School of Heroes and would gladly share a few tips with incoming students. He understood how terrifying it must have felt for her to risk everything. Once he mentioned that with a huge smile, Han smiled back and reminded him of something she had said before: how the raid groups wanted to meet her to sign a preliminary contract, but people from various fields might start to look down on her. So, she thought, if she only glanced at him once, she'd do as he asked and wouldn't let him stop her. The stylist yelled in confusion, not grasping her intentions, but she was ready because it was Yang who wanted to see her evade. As she fought him, she said he forced her to evade. Our protagonist couldn't understand how human movement is interconnected, and each action relates to the past and future. So, from his perspective, he predicted her next move, knowing that either she'd continue or prepare to run. However, Han's technique skipped straight to the conclusion, deceiving the audience's perception. Not only was her motion unpredictable, but her opponent believed he was faster than his actual speed. Years ago, when flash techniques became well known, the stylist realized that true speed isn't merely a matter of knowing the principle, it's primarily about timing. If even one aspect isn't perfected, it all falls apart. The stylist had been in his early 20s when he learned about flash techniques, and it took him 3 months to understand them. Yet, Yang had managed to replicate them just by fighting Han. Even when he was not in peak condition, Yang's stamina was waning, but he still felt he had the advantage more than ever. He was confident he would grow significantly stronger. After all, at some point, he experienced a joy from learning that he had never felt before. So even if this training took place in the usual way, he had a stronger motivation and a goal to achieve. Now he knew exactly how to do it, not just because he needed it for himself, but also from the joy he felt in the process. He realized the path as well as the possibilities with pleasure. At this point, the main character forgot about the pain and fatigue, and by applying an incredible amount of concentration, he was able to use skills that many people were not comfortable with. It looked like he had summoned as many as 4 copies that were hitting in their own directions. It was at this moment that everyone was shocked. The stylist was already running to help, but the girl said she asked him not to interfere, but it seemed that this would not be necessary because our hero was already lying on the floor. She was sorry, so she declared that she had lost, but our hero said the same thing. It was all a common misunderstanding because he had already said that he would only use one hand, but the other person also said that he really didn't expect him to actually use just one hand. Well, on the other hand, once you got hit, then you got hit. He perfectly understood how awkward and uncomfortable that sounded to her, but she didn't have to force it. It wasn't so painful. At the same time, they were approached by a stylist who said that this wasn't about winning or losing because he, as an adult, should take responsibility since he couldn't reconcile them. In the very beginning, he said that just looking at the physical condition of the main character, it was difficult to determine how, so he thought he could just treat today's match as a draw or a scouting match because he could arrange another match the next time he came around, so they could have an official sparring session anytime, anywhere, without any regrets. Our hero wanted to say something, but noticed that Han was towering over him. She asked him to listen carefully because the next time they met was at school, and if he suddenly failed the test for transporting heroes to school, or someone beat him before they met, then she just wouldn't let it go. At the same time, she just went through it, and we can understand that for Yam that match was a very valuable and exciting experience, regardless of whether he won or lost. Facing a peer with skills beyond his common sense was a small dream, a small wish that he was finally able to fulfill. Han was already on her way to CSA Irem, and she asked for her name and also if she was sponsoring Yam. After all, if that was the case, she would have wanted to apologize first since she didn't know what was wrong with her skills, but it didn't seem like she was incompetent. Han realized that Sa Rum was able to choose people. She walked out the door, and you could tell by the look on her face that Yam wasn't the only one who was enjoying this fight. It was already evening, both were sitting in a chair. Our protagonist said that he thought he was going to die because he definitely did not feel very cheerful. Sa Rum, for his part, said that it was a surprise that he wasn't taken to the hospital, but did someone really force him to do this? Our hero said that the grumbling could be left for next time because he was already dizzy, and it also seemed that he was now feeling sick. Sa Rum, despite his words, continued saying that everything was too unexpected, as well as the result of the battle, and the fact that he himself admitted defeat. She even thought that she could win something because even if you take into account the rules he set, the student council president used his hands, but the main character said that he didn't know anything because if we talk about the rules, then he won. But if you take into account that he took off the bandage and started fighting again, it was clear that the two of them weren't just going to touch each other lightly, but he had crossed the line anyway. Prom realized that she was right and that he changed in one moment, so our hero said that he put all his strength into the last blow, because if he had hit her, then one field sensation would have been enough. Even he would have used his hands in such a situation. It was inevitable and fair enough. Sa Rum was even afraid to imagine what it would be like if they were fighting in perfect condition, but our protagonist just smiled and said that at first, he asked why he got into the fight, so he said that he was just completely immersed in the battle. He even liked it, but as soon as he said that, he immediately got up from the chair incredibly abruptly. He said that they came. It was at this point that he was referring to the stylist along with the person who brought the pizzas. As soon as everyone sat down in the chair and started eating, he said that his niece had caused them trouble, so he just wanted to treat them to something delicious. Jan said that he bought pizza. The main thing for him was that there was a lot of it. Sam was also surprised because the main character took and ate a whole box in 2 minutes. It was just because a hunter's calorie consumption, especially for a melee player, is at least 5 times that of a normal person. Andam didn't even think that he hadn't eaten anything during those 4 days of unconsciousness, but at that moment, the stylist said that it was okay to move on to what he should have given him a long time ago. He said that Cram already knew that their workshop was not dealing with leather but with fabrics that were far superior to leather, because they weren't using plant fibers. They were using high-level monsters, the bandit spider, whose danger level reached up to 4 stars. Their clothing is made using special technologies for which they have permits and mixed in different proportions depending on the user's characteristics. It is after the coating stage is completed that a fabric that is much stronger and lighter than leather is obtained. So he said that in Yarang's case, they had already made a plan for what clothes should be made and with what proportions, and his data is available in the Chinan Group laboratory. But the most important thing was that the stylist personally checked his data today, but there's a detail that does not give him rest because, as he said, the last stage of fabric manufacturing is the coating. This is the process of impregnating the fabric with oil to increase the strength of the material. Cram had heard about this, so she asked them to make the best possible coating regardless of the cost, the highest level. It is simply impossible because they mainly use oil, but they had an exclusive contract for its supply. However, due to a sudden abnormal phenomenon, the miners simply could not catch a single whale. Of course, there are alternative materials, but despite the big difference, he can't guarantee the same efficiency, and this already turns out to be a violation of the contract. He admitted his failure in this, because if they refuse their services, then he will understand everything. In this case, refusal, he can introduce them to a master who has a high level of knowledge. At the same level of skill, he produces armor according to the standard method, so it's natural that all the manufacturing costs will be covered by the stylist himself. Rom was about to say something, but our hero interrupted, saying it didn't matter much because there was almost no difference. He insisted that there wouldn't be any special problems, plus he never used expensive equipment. The most important thing was to wear clothes that would make him the perfect stylist. After all, he was the same teacher who taught his niece the technique of wrestling. Those words stung him, so our protagonist kept saying that he didn't know about the equipment but wanted what was made by the hands of a strong person. Rom thought that if our hero believed it didn't really matter, then it was a very strange day. After the main character's words, the stylist stood up from his chair, amused by the thought of a strong man. He hadn't been a hunter for more than 10 years, so it felt awkward to hear such words again, though it was nice. While Cam was surprised that our protagonist had already eaten, the stylist replied that he promised to make an even better quality product for them, and that he would justify their trust. He began to regret more and more what happened last week. The much anticipated hunt had taken place, and he had hoped to get materials he'd long wanted to try out, so he asked if they had heard of sky wasps. Rom said it was royal jelly. She heard it was a precious trophy. Then, SST, who understood what he was talking about, said that while jelly was the most famous, there was another material that armor manufacturers referred to as fantastic among themselves, black wax black besto, which comes from the wasp. If royal jelly inhabits the uterus, then black wax protects an adult queen. There's a small number of those who can produce this material to lubricate the body of the uterus. He said if this flat material could be covered, it would yield an incredible product, even though he'd never seen it in person. At the same time, our hero pulled out his phone and drew something, then showed it to the stylist. He apologized that it wasn't a photo, but a drawing, because his phone had recently broken down. So, isn't that what black wax looks like? The stylist couldn't believe his eyes. If our character had a photo, it meant he'd seen a live skywasp. Ryan thought that if he said anything, he'd be arrested for smuggling, so he couldn't think of a better excuse than to point out Cam, saying he saw her at her house because she was very wealthy, different from ordinary people. At that moment, we saw the hospital where the broker was sitting. He mentioned that he didn't have much to do, so he wanted to check in a bit before his character arrived. He even said he'd come from there, which surprised the broker. They talked for a while, but at one point, he mentioned needing to call as soon as Yang arrived because he felt it was time to end the conversation he had arranged to meet. Zeke was definitely familiar with the broker. They decided to go out, since SNG had just recently had a soothing drink and fell asleep, especially since they were in a hospital and couldn't make any noise. To understand the history, 11 years ago, the legendary cleaning squad called SOC was disbanded, and it was headed by one person, Zeke Esser. Now two people who once called each other comrades met again after 10 years, and neither was particularly happy to see the other. They decided to keep quiet and just follow each other because the broker had previously ranked 5th in South Korea's ranking and was the main fighter of the Venus squad. It was evening now, and our characters left the studio for the street, where they saw that our hero was still frightening her, but if the black wax was likely in the same suitcase they found. She asked to be warned about this in advance, but the only thing our protagonist did after scratching his head was to say that he didn't know what this item was, but was very grateful that Tab played him back. Rom exhaled and said that some definitely can't just sit still. It's bound to get someone in trouble. Didn't he have time today? Our main character looked at his phone and said he wasn't available today either because he had to meet someone. Rom was about to offer a ride if it wasn't too far, but Uncle Zeke also called her on the phone. Just then, the stylist also stepped out and mentioned it was quite cold outside. After all, even though it was only September, it meant it was going to be a cold year. Had Ram already left? The main character said that someone called her, so she went away for a bit. He thought it wouldn't take long, but the stylist said he came to talk just to smoke. However, they couldn't leave him alone with the unusual movements that Yan had shown today, which were a real breakthrough. This technique was either used or invented by his brother, Father Khan, so the stylist himself had a role in transforming it. Our hero at the same time bowed and asked for forgiveness because those with their sweat and blood created this technique, and he should have thought about it. He asked for forgiveness for using their permission, and promised it wouldn't happen again, but the stylist began to say that this isn't why he started to discuss this technique. It seems our hero didn't quite understand him, as the hunter technique doesn't have any copyrights. Of course, course, there are very few cases when this technique is passed on to everyone, but if I have mastered it myself, it's not considered a crime. If a person could easily look at and accept the techniques, it means that from the very beginning they had a good level. The stylist, as soon as he lightened up a bit, asked after all if it really was true that the main protagonist had no experience in learning any techniques properly from the start of the house tour, that he only knew the basics, but during the battle, he looked at his face and concluded that such a hot guy couldn't just learn basic techniques. He didn't even dare to ask how or why he learned it, but wanted to give some advice that he hoped would be useful. He said that Yang has true talent, so it's worth making an effort to spend time on this talent, and then our hero would certainly shine brighter than all the others. The stylist even mentioned that it wouldn't be difficult to enter the school of heroes and become the best hunter if we consider his personal skills, because in their world, especially in the world of hunters, no one will be happy about anyone's success. Naturally, many will recognize his abilities and look up to him. He must also document those who will be jealous. He warned that many people would want to get it, and if they failed, they would try to destroy it. Our main character asked if that advice was really enough just not to attract the attention of dangerous guys, but the stylist said that it made no sense to hide his talents. Besides, such skills aren't easy to reveal. Naturally, modesty could be seen as weakness. It's better to showcase your talents in all their glory rather than crumple. He asked Yang to just be what he is, a genius. It wasn't easy for him to make friends, and he urged them to do their best, as long as their strength allowed to take any other techniques that they could see. Yes, if someone makes claims, then he should not apologize as they did just now. On the contrary, you need to be confident because it's not exactly he who is to blame, but the people who showed the technique. Our hero wanted to say that this is too much, but the stylist, with a light in his eyes, continued that only he can decide whether to do the right thing or not, because to put it more precisely, the right choice belongs to the one who is stronger. Even if Yang spied on the technique, if he uses it correctly, then he will be able to rise to a higher level. From that moment, they will become his personal techniques. The stylist lit a cigarette again, and said that he understood how our hero feels. If this is not the advice that an adult should give, but they live in the world of hunters where the strongest survives. Our protagonist himself saw what a sharp character the stylist Sneh had, because as an adult he should have made a remark to her, but he does not want to break it by force because she was called a cruel genius. While others are afraid of her, they will not be able to look at her from a high place or somehow harm her just like our hero. But at that same moment, Cam ran up and asked to pick up the phone. Our hero couldn't figure out why he was supposed to answer her calls, but as Am said, it was her uncle. He found out that she had brought him there, so he asked if he was nearby or not. He just asked to pass the phone. As soon as Yang answered the phone, Zeke said that he didn't want to call him, but something unexpected happened, and he asked to come back as soon as possible. The only thing that the stylist and Sam heard was our hero's exclamation, as well as the agreement that they would come at the same time. We realized that most likely, Cam, as well as our hero, went to the secret passage of the dungeon. He even said that not only there, in the abandoned subway, there were also secret passages, and each such passage has its own owner. For example, this one belonged to the person he wanted to name but did not, because he met Zeke's face as well as his assistant, who said that the broker was further inside. Zeke also said that he didn't plan on summoning our protagonist there, so rather than heal and drag that bastard to him, Y in turn said that he didn't know what kind of relationship they had. So at the same time, the same pumped up guy said that if he knew that our character would arrive so quickly, he would ask for a t-shirt to bring. He also came up and looked directly into the eyes. The guy said that Y Ryan has a very lively look, so he's probably the one who punched Zika Sunby in the face, because he's quite famous in their squad. He's called a teenager who is scarier than high-level monsters, and also said that their leader wants to meet him once for sure. He was looking out for them in advance, but Zeke was telling them that it was time for them to go, because business was over and there was simply no point in staying there. All of Zeke's company, as well as Crom, just left. So it was at that moment that our protagonist just went to the door that was so full of aggression, and when he entered it, he noticed the president, but he was in good condition, even though Zeke was talking about something support. But the director said that it was quite a serious condition, and it was because his body as well as his self-confidence was simply broken. He thought that Zeke was pathetic, so obediently followed him, but still, he was not alone, so just in case, he asked me if I needed a lighter, because if not, he asked me to bring it from down there. The director was just tired, which made our hero do it, but as soon as he looked down, he noticed that everything was just burning. So what did they they do. At the same time, the director started talking about how if Zeke had told Tom that they had a fight, it wasn't really true because the director was also offended as he was actually going to set fire to him. But that kid who had muscles fights well. He's not even a tank, but he held the defense well in 10 years. He will become a great warrior. Our hero wanted to start a conversation, already knew that he wanted to quit smuggling, but if it was in order to become a hunter, then he had one condition. Within 1 month, Yang should be able to master what he would teach him, because if he couldn't cope, then it would be better to give up and act as a hunter because it will definitely not be easy as it differs from his skills. Our protagonist was shocked because his director wants to teach magic, and the only thing the director can do is get up in the air and immediately break it. Of course, our hero was very much alerted because he had only one question: why did you suddenly start talking about it? But at the same time, the director just took and fell into Young's arms, which made him understand that they were really in very good condition. The body was cold. It's not easy. He was exhausted. So I asked him to climb on his back. At this point, we can see the past where Young is sitting and talking about how at first it was so difficult for him to grind the grains and make the coffee himself. But when he tried it, it was much easier, even though he made a couple of mistakes. If he knew about it like this, he would have done it a long time ago. But while he was working, he could have enjoyed it, but the other person asked him not to say it because it didn't sound like it was with them anymore. It was Lim Yuan, who was 26 years old, or just the director. Young said that this was true, but if he wanted to fix something, then he needed to start acting while the father of our hero continued to pour himself coffee. The director said that they need to catch the same duh, because there is nothing else to do. You just need to announce the goals and destroy them while collecting a raid. But Young said that he wouldn't go any further anyway because they also know what kind of condition he is in, and they also know that it won't take long to win while hiding. Yusong handed a cup of coffee to his companion, but he seemed to have lost his temper. Some bastards were taking over his companion. He began to cry and say that there was definitely more than one Dugan with them. Maybe he would suffer some nonsense again, but the creature that was supposed to die would receive services only if that dream was with them. The director would definitely take care of this. He would collect a raid and find that very monster by any means. They will make the bastard lie at his feet. But at that moment, our little hero came out of one of the rooms, which the director definitely did not expect. He did not even know that his friend had a son, so at the same moment, as soon as our young protagonist greeted Uncle Ian, Young asked the kid to play alone while they talked. So as soon as Yan left the room, Y sort of continued saying that Zeke had created a prescription for painkillers, but they would gradually become addictive, and over time, the pain would blunt his cognitive abilities, judgment, and memory, so even if he held on, in 3 or 4 years he wouldn't be able to find out the person who stands in front of him. Y talked about trying as much as possible, but Young wholeheartedly asked him to stop. The headmaster even felt like this was his first request, asking him that if something happened to him, he wouldn't be able to raise this child, so he asked someone else to look after him. The same person who was known as the Dragon Slayer, someone who had never shown his weaknesses more than once in his life, was now asking for a favor. He wanted help, so our hero could live a normal life in the future and be truly happy, away from adventurers. He wholeheartedly requested this help, making it impossible for the other person to refuse. At that moment, we see the director waking up and asking the time. It was about 10:30, which means he had been lying around for about 3 hours. Despite all this, our hero led the director to a thing he received as a gift at age 14, in honor of their joint work, a syringe, or rather, a first aid potion. The headmaster said it wasn't the best potion, but it would work in urgent situations. It was so infuriating that, unless you were mortally wounded, it could get someone back on their feet in a couple of hours. This was a luxury reserved for precious adventurer goods, but sometimes it was possible. The next time he asked to buy it with his own money. However, it was then that the director asked if he wanted to go back, saying that if he changed his mind, he should refuse. This issue wasn't too difficult to solve, but as soon as he started, there would be no going back. Paying his father's hospital bills wasn't as problematic as one might think, but he felt horrified at the thought of letting a child, who said she would take all the responsibility, take on that burden. Yet Yan told him it wasn't so important because he wasn't a big fan of his own father. He didn't leave any money, and no one knew what might happen next. The director thought he just didn't want to trust him, but even the young protagonists were different. That wasn't the reason. He had always believed that he needed the strength to protect himself and his father, no matter what happened. So, he thanked the director for the syringe, and said he would save it for when it was necessary. As we flash back to the present, we understand that the director director thought our hero would definitely want to keep it as much as possible, but he couldn't imagine he wouldn't touch it up to this point. It's a good thing he didn't sell it on the black market, but at that moment, the only thing the director thought was that our hero would never believe him. Even if he didn't become a smuggler or quit the business, he would pay his father's bills. Jan said he knew that. He was 100% sure it wasn't about theft, just knew that no matter what happened to him, the boss wouldn't leave his father. Thanks to this, he could act without hesitation. The headmaster talked about how the moment he turned his only 14-year-old son into a means to an end, he also betrayed his father. But Yan was sure it wasn't him who did it, it was our hero himself, because even without his help, he would have found a way. He often wondered this: if he could take care of himself, why would the director need to help him? It was the same question that had haunted him all his life. As soon as the headmaster got up, he said that Yang's only request was that the headmaster didn't raise him to be an adventurer, but it wasn't just that. Even during his service, he wasn't so obedient. You couldn't let your son's dragon-slaying talent and abyss seep into ordinary life. To be honest, the headmaster hated this world with all his heart. He hated the very bastards who did this to his father, the idiots who forgot about him because they believed the words of these freaks, and those who stood on the sidelines, knowing everything but looking for an excuse for themselves. This was exactly what the director wanted to rid our hero of. Our hero began to speak about how Zeke was kind of normal, but the director said he would never catch him. He would never catch Dugan because his methods were too simple. Not only adventurers should be ready to catch a hiding dragon, dragons are such a contagion that even if you could recognize them, you can't just not touch them. They're pure blood, designed to cause massive damage. Of course, some of Zeke's squad members were involved, but the rest of the freaks who abandoned his father definitely were not. So, even if the world disappeared tomorrow, the director would never forget the loss of our hero, and wouldn't believe what he didn't want to believe. The headmaster said that, for now, Zeke was bound by the law, but the bastards would help the dragons and hold him down. In the end, he would pay for it. 20 years ago, his father had destroyed that whore, but he would come back again. Fakes would replace fakes, and all those idiotic sickos would see everything collapse. That's why he didn't want him to become an adventurer. At the same time, he handed our hero a piece of paper, saying it was the account number for 4 people. From the very first day until that moment, all the proceeds from his work had been transferred there. Our hero couldn't understand what was going on, but the director said it had already been decided that this place belonged to our future protagonist, so he could start his own business when he grew up. Back then, he expected to give him not just skills but knowledge, more practical and dangerous things than what adventurers needed. He asked to call him when he was in a cast with them because afterward he would teach him magic in exactly 1 month. For now, he asked him to study hard for the entrance exams, even though he considered it all useless. As soon as he wanted to leave, our character said he didn't have to give him a chance, thinking he could change his mind. If he didn't want him to become an adventurer, the director paused and said that was true, but these were just thoughts, and they didn't really matter. 3 years ago, it was the same as it was now, only what our protagonist wanted to do mattered. At the same time, somewhere in the old district of Jen, there was the same girl involved in the incident that occurred in the city. She said they always got together like this, leading her to wonder if it was time for them to get their own space. Did they have any money? But at the same time, it didn't even cover half of their gatherings. Although if they had a place like this, they could at least change to a warm shower. You could see these two were definitely familiar. They continued to laugh at each other because no one was nearby. The girl joked about the belief that without a Perkin, he would either whine like a lost puppy or hold back tears while trying to appear serious. It really ticked the guy off, but that was probably the girl's intention, and he was starting to look like a jerk. He was so angry that his aura could practically be felt radiating from him. He mentioned that people thought he would be punished for fighting with her, but she was ready to start a brawl herself. At that moment, a certain man told them to cut it out because he wasn't going to get involved, but he wanted everyone to know they were there because of a body. Even though he wasn't thrilled about the situation, he didn't want to handle it alone. He raised his hands and admitted he had behaved stupidly. In response, the crazy girl let him have it. She pointed out that he had survived only because there was someone there, yet for some reason, no one had picked up the phone yesterday. What was the point? It wasn't like there was a dire need to listen to any updates. Something would come back and kill all the rescuers anyway. In any case, it was a successful operation, and he didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. The bully chimed in that calling it a successful operation wasn't quite right because 12 people died, but even that didn't get much attention. For 4 days straight, the news only talked about the boys, our heroes, and not a word about the stolen trucks. Most likely, the leader said this was understandable. If not for those two, the Hunter Association wouldn't have escaped disaster, since the transport of 5-star level monsters was so poorly protected that ordinary people died as a result. Their efforts certainly attracted all the media, and they even got the families of the victims on board to shift attention away from the association's screw-ups to those two boys in the car. The girl screamed that she could have killed them all, but the leader warned that as soon as they discovered her, they'd label her a terrorist. This way, no one would focus on the association's blunders, but rather on the crime race. If they messed up again, it would definitely cause a disaster, so the bullies suggested it was probably best to keep staging some accidents to distract them. Just then, another member of their crew showed up, dragging a person behind him on a chain. It was his job, but he called it a hobby. They had caught a hunter who was trying to hide from his friends to be a hero, attempting to sell a trophy the previous night. They caught him red-handed. It was Owen Hayek, currently ranked 97th. Many said he was definitely a scary man despite being the youngest team member. He had sold his soul for loot in the shadows. This name was unfamiliar to them, so the guy said this was a secret hideout for hunters, a small base in the area with a dungeon, a secure place where monsters couldn't invade. There was space inside to rest, some special items, and various supplies, but not everyone used the bases correctly. Some people would say all sorts of things there if they needed a secret spot that few knew about. The person asked the hunter to repeat what he said, that their party would be in the shade, involving members of his team, leaders, and some civilians. The big guy had questions about whether they were going to kill him right away, to which the hunter continued that their lithium would guide friends. The composition was always different. They were rich folk looking to have a good time, the kind of high rollers who drink potions to relax. The girl thought that was cool, but the boss realized it was just a reset for people no longer satisfied with regular pills, but seeking sharp adventures in the dungeons. They insisted there's no safer place than theirs since it's guarded by hunters, letting everyone have fun far from the outside world and prying eyes. The hunter, who had been bagged, said he didn't have much choice. When he arrived, he was told everyone did this. The man with the chains approached him, warning him to stop shaking because it was way too late. He added, if he thought he was hurting anyone again, the boss would be very sorry, but they'd have to let him go. Just then, the man was killed. The plan was for no one to survive there because hunters had abused ordinary citizens due to monster appearances, a title that would astonish the world. Many still wondered why Boza wouldn't join them, even though it seemed like an easy task after all. Their target was the famous hunter squad, the 2 golden elites, and 6 rankers. He said the opponents would be strong enough to relieve all the accumulated stress, and he asked them to cut down as many as they wanted. As soon as their bodies were found, everyone would see it wasn't all smooth sailing in their world, because soon, it would be time for them to face Squad Scar. A month later, Wei Rang was driving in his car, saying he was almost there, just 2 minutes away. They were all over him today, but she still felt weak in her hands. It was at that moment he arrived where the elf girl was waiting for him, and she reminded him that he only had that weekend left to ride like an exam, even though someone mentioned he'd be training with his headmaster. She wanted to say she'd prepare too, but at that moment, another passenger, young Yal, who he'd met at the hospital that morning, emerged from behind the car. They started talking, and he mentioned he wanted to help. It would be nice to exchange knowledge. Most importantly, he said they'd be in the same class. Young Gal was really excited, but it felt creepily intense at the same time. They all needed to understand that the main training room included a swimming pool and recreation areas, and food and drinks could be freely taken. There was also a gym because all the special weight machines were designed for hunters. Sam mentioned that the music in the dorm was on the 5th floor, and each room had a shower, because if anyone wanted to wash up, there was even a spa on the 4th floor. Our hero was stunned, as he couldn't believe all of this belonged to her uncle, but she asked him not to be surprised. High-level rankers had bought several mountains and turned them into training fields. Her uncle often came there with colleagues just to train, and on other days, they could safely use the place, but at the same time, Sam asked them about the goons' involvement there. Yang said it was inappropriate to call a classmate it, but Rum said she didn't know what he told Tom since he agreed to come, although she didn't think he considered him a classmate. Our protagonist looked at her and asked if she even talked to him normally, but she insisted that not only did she not, she would bet no one from their class or even their faculty ever talked to him. Everyone knew he thought too highly of himself. If he ignored excellent students from the faculty, he would definitely ignore hers. Just then, the bully started running toward them, looking very happy. Our hero even said he'd think about all the devices that were there a little later, but Colin just said he wanted to try something new. Our character was still in the car talking to Colin, who was surprised it helped him as say Rom, but our hero didn't see anything wrong with it. it. If they had a bad relationship, he just needed to say so. Colin replied there weren't any other kids at school he had any sort of relationship with. It was just that Cam was a bit intimidating but also really cool. He asked if he really meant the same Cam, wondering if it was true she was cool. It was true because they were quick-witted, but it was obvious that many people didn't like her since the first year. Still, she never lost her confidence. Even though he had no idea about her grades, he just thought she was strong and unwavering. So as soon as Colin stood next to Tom, our protagonist announced he was suggesting a threesome for the weekend. Tom said he needed to prepare for a practical test, but the latter thought it seemed uncomplicated since it was just about memorizing and analyzing rather than applying practical skills. Cam herself said you just needed to analyze, and all the examples given weren't hard. They already knew where the exam was held and what topic it was on. He added that you couldn't say it didn't matter, but since they were all there in that place, they could spend a lot more time training together than just the two of them. Over the past month, he had encountered strong people more than ever and learned things he wouldn't have on his own. He wanted to train with them properly because then they could share their special knowledge and rate each other, which would definitely be useful for all of them. Our hero ended the conversation by stating they were outcasts, though it didn't need to be said. He remarked that if he entered hero school and made new friends, he'd share his knowledge with them. He didn't know how things were now, but it seemed the other students did. At this point, all three thought Heroes School was tough, a place to gain experience and good friends. Our hero said he would probably enroll, but might leave Cam for the second year, or she might even benefit if she didn't want to learn or train. Sam said she understood what he was getting at but couldn't teach them anything. At the same time, Ryan stated there was one thing they both didn't know: how to use magic. She personally used it, but while she was a good archer, that didn't mean she was good at magic. Young G made a forbidding face and said if that were the case, he would definitely want to learn how to use it, though he planned to eventually. Rom was in shock, but Yoon thought she handled it right, looking natural. After 15 minutes in the fight room, Colin said he needed to call his parents. Our protagonist was surprised that room had everything, even clothes in all sizes. He asked if he could take a suit home. Colin said he could do whatever he wanted, but was he doing it all on purpose, caring for her and Shotgun? It wasn't for nothing, they were training together. Rom thanked him, saying she never thought she'd make friends with anyone besides him and Cholin. Our hero said he thought she realized he wasn't so terrible after all. Just then they were interrupted by Anisha, who said she had a bad feeling when she wanted to go to the gym, but now that she saw Rom, she understood why she felt that way. Rom was shocked, asking what she was doing there. Anisha replied her uncle wasn't there that day, since she heard him say before they could just come when no one was around. Did he say something she didn't know, like Anisha being in a special relationship? At that moment, Rom introduced our hero to Anisha Ezer, who was her cousin. Although they called her Ani, they were the same age. Anisha waved. Surprised Rom brought a friend and happy for her. She also introduced them to a sophomore from their school, Jang Sang Young Sundi, who must have been seen several times because she invited her sophomore friends over the weekend to chat and train. Only those with time came with them initially, but Anisha thought it was even better that Rasta was there too. She mentioned that Cam didn't like it when there were too many people, so she probably wanted to leave. If it went on, others might think they were up to something. Sam wanted to interject, but Anisha told her not to be stubborn. It was already safe to ask them to include her in their group. In her view, it was a good chance for her. However, our protagonist chimed in, saying they were all going to train together too because another friend came along, and he was just on the phone, so he asked if they could see him as well. At one point, the sophomore turned to the main character, saying he hadn't seen him before and asked for his name. Meanwhile, Yayoung talked about how he didn't have a special school, just an ordinary one. He was in his first year, aiming to transfer to Heroes School that year, and Rom agreed to help him with the prep exams. He mentioned he didn't know much yet, but would do his best. Everyone laughed at his enthusiasm, finding it comical and hard to comprehend. Yan was about to suggest they practice together, but the sophomore immediately stepped in, telling him to get in the car and go home before it got dark. Anisha and her crew started saying they didn't care if he lied about starting late because they all knew Tom was just embarrassed about his regular school, so he made up a story about getting into the School of Heroes. They said that average students couldn't keep up with them, and if someone hung around with them, they risked embarrassing themselves, and eventually eventually getting disappointed. They told him to go find tutors at his own level. Our hero wanted to respond, but at that moment, a punch landed on his face. There was a loud slap and Yang started whining about the pain. Everyone knew that Zhang Sang-young wasn't really trying to kill Yam, because even the non-official hunters couldn't beat ordinary people outside of dungeons, and it was considered a crime. He just wanted to wave his fists in front of Yam's face, showing off his angry expression to make Yaren feel the difference in their levels. The sophomore couldn't understand how he managed to hit our protagonist since he was supposedly keeping his distance. It didn't make sense. If he had a normal reaction, he would have dodged back instead of leaning forward. Everyone could see the main character squirming in pain, mumbling that he just wanted to be friends, but the guy hit him anyway. It was so weird that he thought there was nothing to be done, and now they'd have to defend themselves while looking at him with incredibly threatening faces. According to the rules, there were surveillance cameras installed in the pre-training rooms for hunters, continuously recording from different angles so hunters could review their movements. Sarum knew that Yang had intentionally put himself in a position to attack. She didn't know why, but now he definitely had insurance, because the recent spectacle could clearly be interpreted as a surprise attack. The sophomore couldn't grasp what kind of protection our character was on about, so Yaren replied that he was simply a vulnerable, closed-off person, always keeping his suffering to himself. The sophomore started to say there was no need to make a fuss over a light hit since there wasn't even any blood. At the same time, Yang pointed at him, saying he was trying to apologize after hitting him. Would he have to call the cops or go straight to the headmaster? The sophomore, asking to recover, wondered what he wanted, if it wasn't money, or if they really wanted to train with them, but our protagonist said he'd already gone through that, because if he didn't deal the same amount of damage he received, he wouldn't be able to sleep at night. The sophomore said in that case, our hero could hit him back because he believed he could take it from the boys standing right in front of him. An ordinary schoolboy just fights with his bare hands at worst, and student's strength would be limited. But the moment Yang raised his hand next to him, the sophomore envisioned how it would feel, and suddenly knew all his teeth would shatter, so he didn't think twice about jumping out of the way. Of course, our protagonist, pretending not to get it, said that wasn't what they agreed on, while the other students thought he just had to let himself be hit. It was obvious they, as students at the hunter school, would dodge Yen's attacks to tease him, but the second-year students couldn't help but retreat from the incoming blow, or else his own face might get smashed. What the sophomore saw in front of him was a monster exuding an incredible amount of energy. Anisha, noticing such a retreat, remarked that it would be more correct not just to back off, but to officially apologize and offer compensation. Otherwise, the fight would just feel like a beating. He immediately said he could apologize. He admitted he was a bit foolish, but our hero told him to choose between sparring or fighting. The sophomore realized something was off when he saw the main character flew straight up from his seat, calling him an idiot. They would see who turned out pathetic, but Yaren was already beside him, moving at full speed. So quickly, it looked like there were two people instead of one, causing the sophomore to hit only an illusion, after which Sammy received a blow right on the nose. At the same time, we could see that the punch didn't carry all the force behind it, and Yang looked at us, asking if this was truly the end, but it was enough to bruise the pride of the hunter school student. In that instant, he lost it, trying to hit our character constantly, but nothing worked. Then our protagonist stepped right up to him, saying he couldn't even take a few punches, and a moment later, he kicked the sophomore down to the floor. Everyone thought the sophomore acted deliberately to weaken the enemy, and they didn't mock him, but he was genuinely curious if he really was a student of the hunter school. Meanwhile, Ryan merely remarked that compared to his previous battles, this felt entirely different because he wanted to converse honestly without fighting. He had forgotten that he didn't mind. He wanted to thank his opponent for a good fight, and admitted that he caused him a lot of discomfort, extending his hand to help him up, but the sophomore just looked away. The main character continued his monologue, saying the second snow should have been as strong as the last time, reminding himself that he could have just ignored it. He asked to take a look at the video from the camera, trying to understand if there was something else he needed to do to annoy the sophomore. It was clear he wanted to see the footage, and most likely, it would clearly show how he tried to simplify things while slightly reducing his pace, although he expected more from Saram. Saram was shocked. Did our protagonist really plan all this from the start just for a video? He had been trying to hurt Yang ever since he stepped through the door, and it was that girl in the dress who brought these high school students here. It was blatantly obvious that she didn't hide her disdain for Saram. Our hero paused for a moment before continuing, saying he didn't know what school life was like for them, but according to Colin, It seemed quite similar to them just hanging around quietly. He asked him to be honest, probably not expecting him to pretend to be calm. He confessed that he didn't have the highest self-esteem but wasn't about to take ridicule from the back. This was likely just a mission for her, but for him, it was a valuable chapter in his life because he never doubted they would develop faster together. Just as they were having this conversation, they noticed the same sophomore who wanted to hit them running after them, but all he managed to do was shout, as Anisha swiftly snagged him with her magic. She said she called him, not because he was very strong but because she thought he would show better abilities here, and he felt disgraced in front of everyone. All our heroes understood that Anisha was left out of the picture, so as not to waste energy on trivial matters, but to release them all at once. However, nothing changed at all. The only thing noticed was that he seemed to be staring at his hand for some reason, so he asked what was wrong with it. Again, we realize he's feeling the same way he did during the battle against the Horned Horror. We flash back to 3 weeks ago. Our hero was unpacking a box with his things, but noticed they were in terrible shape, like junk, especially the kill blood, which they probably couldn't even use anymore. Its ability is that if the wearer's life is threatened, the spell activates. At that moment, he felt the pendant activate in his pocket, and perhaps that's the only reason he managed to land unharmed, but that surge of strength still haunted our protagonist. Is this another blood effect? After all, it couldn't just be some secret power within him that suddenly burst out. The thing in his hands was worth about 22 billion, so it would be strange if it had only one ability. Only then did he realize how much money he had. We're transported back to the moment when the magic activated. He looks at his hands and realizes he wasn't mistaken. He was actually feeling the same as back then. But why now? It probably wasn't because of that artifact. As soon as he recovered from his thoughts, he noticed that Anisha was suggesting that instead of helping Sa-Rum, he should help her because most likely, Sa-Rum had paid him enough money for her to rise. She even said that no matter how much she offered, the others would pay 3 times that, including costs. Sa-Rum shouted that she was talking complete nonsense, but Anisha cut her off, saying her words weren't nonsense, just a reasonable suggestion, as it wasn't for nothing that Yaren could defeat their high school student. The strange thing is that he pretended he couldn't enter school and didn't even call out your name. She realized there was a reason he couldn't concentrate on the entrance exam, but the problem could be solved if he had money, so the most important thing about Cam was money. Anisha started to exaggerate, saying she didn't even have talent, friendliness, or reputational abilities at all, but at that moment, our protagonist smiled, and said he couldn't say for sure that she lacked stamina. He understood Anisha had spoiled many lives at school. He had no idea what could offend him so much that he could scold his sister, and she created all sorts of nasty things. Anisha lost her temper so much that she unleashed incredible magic toward our hero, which nearly hit him. She also mentioned that all classes were cancelled this week, and when the other high school students said it was enough to see their weak sophomore do this, there was no need to think about protecting him as a leader. Most likely, those high school students were like that, just there to find connections. She regretted the time spent, but it wasn't a big loss. She suggested pretending nothing happened. Then she turned to our protagonist and said that if his goal wasn't her sister's money, then she advised him to be careful from next week because it could impact his school life. He was about to respond, but Crom stopped him, asking what kind of magic she had. Sa-Rum immediately confessed that Anisha probably set it up to learn more about him because there was no way she could have called herself a good person before, but she was just obsessed with everything related to him. Probably after learning about his existence, she wanted to interfere in their relationship. Now she was going to want to take him away from those who were taking the entrance exam. Goosebumps ran down their skin at the thought of what might be in store for them, but our hero didn't feel anything at that moment. He was more worried about where his strength evaporated when Anisha released all her power. He understood that back then, the power was an inability to kill and kill, but simply power awakened under the spell's effect. The power appeared as a reaction to Sa-Rum's spell. Sa-Rum looked at him, asking if he was okay because he looked strange, much older than usual. But Yan kept his fist down and said everything was fine because he needed to learn magic and everything else as soon as possible. By this time, the sophomore had woken up, but the only thing he saw after waking was Youngle, looking normal as usual, which scared the sophomore. Of course, the sophomore couldn't understand what Young was doing there. At the same time, our hero approached and apologized, saying he thought he could take one punch, but didn't expect to humiliate him so much in front of everyone. The sophomore replied that he asked for it because if he didn't look, he turned out to be a jerk for meeting face to face with the hero in a district tragedy. He even dared to be impertinent to such a person. He should be thankful for being alive at least. This was exactly what led our hero to think. He didn't expect such an obvious outcome because he hadn't tried to defeat them with all his might. The sophomore was surprised. So Jan replied that he thought his movement speed was only slightly above basic level and couldn't control his emotions, which made this fight a bit boring. Maybe that's why he was able to follow a few habits. The sophomore seemed interested, so he asked about these habits. Our protagonist said he had analyzed the video with the camera a little while they were out. He suggested paying more attention to the center of gravity before moving the arms. The body should bend in the direction of the foot they step on. He also wrote all this on his phone. Sa-rum knew the same high school student must be in shock right now, and she knew our hero wouldn't demand money for such training, but would just give advice. She thought it wasn't strange, because Yaron wanted to hear constructive criticism from the seniors, but the sophomore was still stunned, unable to believe our hero did so much for him, especially since he wanted to hit him secretly, just recently. But the main character said it didn't make any difference, the high school student had received enough for his mistake, and he held no hard feelings. They were all there for training, so if they broke up now, it would be sad. So he offered to do something useful, and asked them to note down his phone number so he could send them a video as soon as call was gone. As our protagonist left, he said the high school students were really bastards because they just ran away, leaving their friend behind. It must be really hard for him. At the same time, they both approached Sa-rum, who said they still had a lot to do because they should start spell theory. She suggested comparing the fuel needed for magic or spells since the quality of spells depends on this fuel. Our hero asked about the wording, so Young explained it like this. Am said she had already mentioned it. Even if you gather a lot of newspapers, it's as bright as a single ember because everyone can use a certain amount of magic. So, she said her magic level is C. This is a higher level in the wizard system, so it can either attack enemies powerfully or improve the strength of comrades, but it will also be useful for them to learn how to improve their strength during battle. All these words inspired our character because he understood that he could improve his abilities. If it works the same as in Kill Blood, then it will be very strong. He even asked if they could master it in a week, but Cam made a very unintelligent face and said that a beginner definitely can't learn this in 3 days and 2 nights because she has long been proficient in magic, so she can't say for sure. Just understanding the essence of the game requires at least 2 weeks, and his improvement in strength is only the smallest thing they need to learn more. At the same time, a high school student stood up and said that he could help if you want to learn from a jerk like him because, after all, this is his specialty. This school year, he is better at self-strengthening. As soon as it was evening, Ya Yang was able to cast the lowest ranked spell, Fire Sprout. He was very surprised, but the high school student asked him not to be so happy, because it would be strange if it didn't burn. Anyone can use this spell if they don't know how. Ya Yang asked if he should create more fire or add water, but the sophomore told him that he needed to keep the spark alive and focus on what was going on inside. First, he needed to feel the magic. Our hero could not understand how he could feel something he had never felt before, but the high school student said that it was different now. Even though he didn't call it magic, he was using magical power without realizing it. The magic in his body was already active, and now was the best way to feel it. As soon as our friend closed his eyes, the sophomore told him to concentrate on the sensations, trying not to let him drown. If he feels something, then we can assume that the first step has already been taken. As soon as he started trying to sense everything around him, the sophomore thought that he didn't expect someone like Yaryang to have no foundation, so he hoped it wouldn't take a weekend. At the same time, the main character said that he felt tickled and tingled, as if he was just trying to get a sense of the world around him. An electric current rose from his lower abdomen, spreading throughout his body. The high school student couldn't believe it because he felt magic in less than a minute. Yang kept saying that everything he felt was amazing because he could feel that there were about 100 of them in his body. We understand that there are only 2 parts of the human body responsible for magical powers: the core, located at the level of the navel, generating mana, and then the mnemonic chains that distribute magical power through them, totaling 127. While the high school student also engaged our hero in dialogues, he asked if y'all played any musical instruments, because if so, it would be very easy to understand. She said that using magic is the same as playing and composing on the piano. Young Gull was confused, and at the same time, a D-rank spell, Thunderfist, appeared in Om's hands. She said that when she created it, she didn't cast any spells or make any strange signs because, contrary to popular belief, Magic isn't usually loud. Most of the magic happens inside the body, even when it is not moving. If you take a piano, it just presses certain keys in a certain order and at a certain time, and music is born. With magic, it's the same thing. All you have to do is think of monarch chains as a piano, and magic is a composition played by pressing the chains. She also explained that out of 127 chains of magic, sending certain chains in a certain order at a certain time is what magic is really about. Young Gal pondered and realized that if this was the case, what would happen if the order was wrong? Were there any side effects? Graham said that light magic can work if there aren't too many mistakes, and the more complex and powerful the magic is, the higher the probability of success, even with the slightest mistake, so the risk increases. She said that even with this Thunderfist, which is only of this rank, if you make a few mistakes, you'll be electrocuted and immobilized for half a day. Not to mention spells ranked higher, then the mistake can be fatal, which is why it's important that the front line protects the back where the mages are located, for it is very difficult to concentrate in the heat of battle. Young Gaul, for his part, said that he had been trying to feel the magical power because he had been practicing in his spare time, but he still couldn't feel each chain separately. So, at that moment, Psalm started explaining to him with renewed vigor. Yaryang looked at her and realized that she was very talkative when it came to things she was good at. At the same time, he got up from the floor, which the high school student noticed. He thought that he was leaving, but Yaryang only said he didn't think he needed to do anything else. The high school student, in turn, said that he didn't understand what he was talking about because training with the sprout should be periodic until it starts to feel magical power naturally, to which Yaryang said that he meant he was already used to this feeling. He can't count the chains, but he feels that the sprout can't count the chains, where each one is located. The high school student could not believe this, and at the same moment, our hero said that on the right, there are 2 chains that end on the fingers, 1 on the wrist, 3 more on the elbow, total of 6 on the right hand. On the left hand, more than on the right. If you count then 10. What he can't believe is that someone who knew nothing just now already feels them, as if he's trying to deceive him. So our hero said that he's not deceiving him. He just wanted to know what to do next, but also didn't know what to call it because 2 is formally not an option, and some he can't name because they don't go to the same school. We understand that there are some minor differences, but in the case of the human race, the number and approximate location of the chains are the same. Each chain is numbered from 1 to 127. It was at this point that the high school student decided to show how the chains actually work before hitting his fist in the normal state, but starting to inhale also uses chains, that is, using the E-rank spell muscle breakthrough. Then he asked our hero to feel the difference for himself. The upperclassman threw his punch right at our hero's face, so even Young noticed that his speed and strength were greatly increased. No one would get away with a normal broken nose, but the upperclassman was amused that our protagonist didn't even bat an eye while being hit by such a blow. He even said that at the first stage, the main character was at the bottom of the class last year, so he has some confidence in his basic physical abilities. But most likely, our hero saw that he was missing a lot, so he probably started using buffs. He was sure that instead of looking for the talent he didn't have, he decided to find a workaround. Fortunately, his magical abilities were not bad. He searched and started learning spells that he could learn and master, so he ended up coming across buffs. They turned out to be very surprising for him. However, depending on how you combine them, you can achieve more than just summing up the characteristics. Yeah, Ryang even realized that the punch that was thrown a few seconds ago wasn't just one, there were several combined ones, but the high school student looking at his hand said there was one. Talented people don't care about buffs because in the worst situation, they will need 2 or 3, while he has dozens. As a result, in his second year, his grades rose to average, and he even led the team himself. However, I think those who are better ignore him, considering he's cheating. That's probably why he was so excited today when a student who is considered the best in first year called him to practice, even though she wanted to use him to get close to others. But he was still happy about it because he wanted to share his ideas with them, wanted to be recognized. He must have looked like a jerk trying to impress Anisha. After all, the one who is constantly ignored wants attention the most. Noticing today that it was getting late, he wanted to leave and repeatedly apologized, but Yang asked him to stop doing that because if Tom was really pinned down, then they still had 58 hours left and he was looking forward to his lessons in the morning. As soon as Monday came, we can see that everyone was already gathered. They were all discussing how nice the morning air felt after a good workout. They didn't think they'd train all weekend and lose sleep, so we can understand they didn't even sleep, but no one was tired except Cam because both our hero and Young Ji's stamina was level A. She never thought joint training could be so useful, because if they were in the center, she wouldn't give give up on KPA right now. The high school student also said that he called a taxi. Anyone need to go to Gangnam? Anyway, I have practice at school today, so I don't think he'll go there. At the same time, our hero raised his hand and told him to drop him off at any station on line 2. They would have to give him a ride. After all, today was a weekday morning, so the roads were very busy. Also, at the same time, he awkwardly admitted that he was working on more than just the two of them this weekend because it was probably his best weekend since he was 5. He didn't know if they'd see each other again before the exams because he'd be busy for the next month while everyone else studied. So, he asked everyone to do their best, especially Sa-rom, because if she failed the final exam, it would be a great shame. Sa-rom blushed deeply, making it clear she knew, and she also spoke to Youngul, asking them both to pretend to know each other. Then he went straight to the car waiting for him, where a high school student was also saying goodbye to everyone. Of course, we understand that Youngul and Aim are still awkward together as they wait for the car. As it started to get light, our hero said he was glad they got to their destination without traffic jams, and also expressed that it was his best weekend. Thanks to the high school student, he learned a ton of new things, learned a few points, and also that special technique. The high school student thought for a moment and said that this was just a theory because he had never seen it in action and hadn't used it himself. Maybe it was nonsense, or perhaps it was just his imagination, but he felt it would work in practice, because if he learned it, he could use it as a means of communication. The high school student asked about it, but our protagonist either said it was a long story or that if it all worked out, he would definitely report the results. So, if there was a chance, he even suggested having lunch together. He said he agreed, but only if he could get in because he didn't have time for a guy who went to a regular school. Our hero, of course, appreciated this. At the same moment, they said goodbye. Yan came home, saying he was very tired and still needed to go to school, but he was immediately interrupted by the headmaster standing right in the middle of the room. The headmaster even said he wouldn't have time to sleep. Yan asked, "What about school?" But the headmaster only said there was no need to work because he was already preparing to transfer to the Academy of War. No one got extra points on the entrance exams for perfect attendance, so he asked Yan to pack his things because he needed a change of underwear and a couple of t-shirts. The headmaster also noted that he had learned magic, which, although rudimentary, was still active. Our main characters said that if you knew the lesson's content, then of course it was better to prepare for it, but the director said he was right and not, because it would be of little use. Our hero couldn't understand what he was talking about, so the director asked him not to misunderstand. He didn't say he did something stupid, he just needed to understand that these were not private lessons but a test of whether he was truly ready and wanted life, just like an adventurer. To make sure, the director wanted to check it out thoroughly because he didn't know about the rest, but one condition was that he was not as talented as he thought. At this moment, the director had an incredibly serious face, but then returned to normal, and warned our protagonist that he had a few things for him. If they went badly, he'd restock them as he went. Of course, Yen wanted to know where they were going, because wasn't this the same training ground he used when he was still on duty? But the director said he sold the place a long time ago. While talking about it, he looked nervous because he couldn't open the lid no matter what. Yaren asked what he was doing there. So at the same time, the director said our protagonist's weapon was there because someone sent it to him. How did he even know the address? Well, as soon as the lid was opened, Yaron could see his new weapon, which was almost different in color but was actually smaller and felt better in his hand. The director also asked them to move out of the way because if anyone was interested in weapons, they'd still have time to test them. Why Ryan was looking forward to this moment, but at one point, his joy turned to despair when in front of him was a carnivorous ant, a danger level reaching 4 stars. He kept repeating in his head that when encountering a 3-star monster, it was better to focus on escaping, and it was best not to meet 4-star monsters or higher, which was exactly what he learned. At the same time, the director said this was only true for smugglers, not adventurers, because if the latter gets scared and can't move, let the latter tell him directly, and he'll save him. The headmaster, on the other hand, was only thinking that half a year ago, he saw the skills of the guy in front of him with his own eyes. Even though carnivorous ants were especially dangerous monsters for close-range attacks, if his skills were the same as half a year ago, he would probably die. As soon as the director uttered his last words and launched his attack, he struck so quickly that even our hero, who was focused, got injured. This was the second time he'd faced a 4-star monster or stronger, though there was a big difference in the monsters he dealt with before and now. However, the essence remained the same, whether attacking or defending. No mistakes could be made. If there were no supports, mistakes would lead to failure. He had to do everything in his power to handle this quickly. He was able to strike and evade, flying out of the monster's line of attack. He was poised for a hit, knowing that the biggest difference between a 4-star monster and a 3-star adventurer is intelligence. Many monsters can deal with situations just as humans do, even engaging in psychological warfare. Just as our hero was about to strike, he turned his head to shield himself. Realizing he couldn't attack that creature with a needle, the headmaster thought it was beyond him. He wanted to use his own magic, but in that moment, Yaren simply stepped up and split the ant in half with his new staff. It was incredibly powerful. Having landed, he couldn't believe the ant had just vanished, and the headmaster was shocked he activated the staff without knowing how to use it. The director asked him how he felt. Was he weak or lethargic? To this, our protagonist replied that he was a bit out of breath, but didn't think he was tired. Just a little shocked. The director lit a cigarette and noted he didn't feel any magic power, revealing that this feature added the blade while using stamina as an energy source. The mechanism itself wasn't special, rather a bit outdated, but such a feature was never free. Using the blade came at the cost of endurance. But the blow he just delivered, even with a slightly broken breath, was incredible. He mused that he was lucky. If not for his dirty tricks, it could have been a very important lesson. Our hero admitted he would have definitely lost, but he was sure he should have lost, even though he didn't see his skills as bad. Objectively speaking, his talent was not bad either, though in terms of combat power, he could say he was at the level of a gold adventurer. This made our hero blush, but the director interrupted him, asking if good could be called praise. He knew 10 people, including his father, some of whom were talented, and more than half had perished against weaker monsters. Just then, another ant appeared and wanted to attack our hero. He realized it was the same ant that had taken him down earlier. It had the ability of super regeneration, allowing it to recover completely in such a short period. As our main character was about to strike, he noticed his staff had transformed into a hammer. The director recognized that his stance and swing allowed the weapon to gauge the environment and optimize its shape. This might seem useless, but it was the best feature for our character. Yet, no matter how great the weapon, if he didn't choose the right strategy, he would definitely lose. Time was limited. Enough time had passed since then, and we can see that Yaren was already quite battered and lacked strength. Just as the ant was about to strike, the director intervened, activating the shield and lighting another cigarette. He asked our protagonist what he was trying to do, as he couldn't even dodge. They were even discussing defense, but Yaren said he thought he had destroyed all the weak points. What more did he need to do? The director advised him that it was just about escaping, but our hero wanted to win. The director reiterated that he not only had to escape, but to a place where his enemy's regeneration wouldn't work anymore. With this strategy, he would win. Ideas began to spark in the protagonist's mind as he realized he needed to change the battlefield. There were 3 strategies for fighting a carnivorous tree. The first and most effective was to lure it into a trap where it couldn't absorb nutrients due to constant regeneration. The headmaster said that if he had lured it to a rocky area or abandoned ruins, he would have defeated it 5 times already, but he'd never thought about it. In our hero's head, all he could think about was finding a weak point and hitting harder. He didn't know any other way. While the headmaster was discussing this, Yaren pointed out that the director should have noticed something. The carnivorous tree had already begun breaking through the barriers. The headmaster admitted he wasn't good at defense, so he used the second strategy of employing fire abilities ranked C or higher to completely burn its body. The director explained this was why the carnivorous tree was a 4-star monster. It was weak and vulnerable to fire. Still, he clarified that if fire couldn't be used, the first strategy could suffice, because the carnivorous tree wasn't that tough. Until they figured out how to handle it, it had been a disaster for melee-focused adventurers. Everyone understood that a fire spell could kill it, but the first plan was much easier than that. No military incendiary grenade even came close to it. The first generation of adventurers didn't even have normal attacking spells, paying with their lives because of that. Just like any other strategy developed back then, the talented ones the director mentioned had died at the hands of monsters that could be defeated in ridiculously simple ways. You might think adventurers were born too early and couldn't reach their full potential. At the same time, he looked at our hero and wanted to return to the topic, asking him what it was like the first time he was defeated by a monster. Yaren looked at the ground for a moment and said it was awful. It was different from losing to another human. It was ridiculously humiliating. The regret and feeling of loss that comes with realizing you haven't learned anything are felt by every adventurer at least once. Then there's the price. If you're lucky, you come back with just a scare, but in the worst cases, someone's life ends, and you blame yourself for surviving while your ally didn't. The director stood over our hero and told him he didn't mean to make him feel bad about this. He just wanted him to understand that becoming an adventurer comes at too high a price and doesn't guarantee more knowledge. But as soon as the director finished the monologue, he asked our protagonist to take a bag and start running for several hours, explaining that the size of the dungeon is different from the size of the location it occupies. They all seem the same on the outside, and the distance feels the same, but the real size of the dungeon is just huge. Inside, it is several times larger than outside. In the case of the Ikara's jungle, which includes 4 districts of Seoul and Yo Island, the area inside is equivalent to the entire Korean peninsula. As soon as both characters reached their destination, the director simply asked them to look back and admire the beautiful view. As the landscape was very diverse, they appeared in the dungeon that used to be called Signer, Danger Level A. The director warned him not to relax, even though it was very beautiful, because even at the bottom of the food chain here, there's only a 3-star hell, and alone, Hwang definitely wouldn't have lasted. It turned out that over the next 2 weeks, he would train him day and night. After those 2 weeks, training would continue during the day, but he would survive the nights without it. After all, if someone uses everything they've learned, they can last for a month. That's the exam. The only thing the main character said was that he was sorry they only had a month. As soon as a month had passed, it was November, the day of the Warrior Academy transfer practice exam. Sa-Rom was very excited because our protagonist hadn't replied to her for a whole month, and the exam was at 9:00. Would he really not come? At that moment, she noticed that he was calling her. She turned to him but realized something was off. He told her he was sorry for not responding to her messages because he had been in a place without connection for a whole month and hadn't notified her in advance that he was leaving. She was actually excited because his face looked very strange. Since his bangs had been falling into his eyes all the time, he couldn't stand it and just cut them off, although it didn't turn out very well. In general, he apologized for making her worry. He said, "Well, we'll go. I'll wash up and come back." Wanted to ask him to wait by touching his back, but sensed an incredible danger that immediately passed. Hwang only asked for forgiveness because it had become a habit to react if something approached from behind. His girlfriend told him not to worry. She understood everything. As soon as both of them got to the car, we can see that our protagonist told her everything, that he really liked the new weapon, that he hadn't even taken his things, but was still a little worried. We can also understand that it was the first time Cam felt this aura from a human, but, in reality, this was not the true reason for the fright. The energy she sensed from our hero felt very familiar to her. For a split second, she felt that the aura coming from monsters was coming from him. Once they were both in the car, our main character commented that the new clothes fit him snugly and felt weightless. So mentioned that if there had been more time, they could conduct a functionality test and adjust some details, because the better the equipment, the more functions it had. The only thing our hero was waiting for was the approach of the exam. Seeing Rom thought it was better than just doing nothing out of excitement, but reminded him not to let his guard down, even if it was just an exam. Our hero replied that he wasn't looking forward to the exam. He meant the School of Heroes itself, because they'd been talking about it for months, but he'd never seen it or been there. At the same time, we realized that this school was located in the city of Seoul, near Ensan Mountain, which is 270 m above sea level, where the park was located in the mountains. The former Mount Drake transformed into the highest mountainous area on the entire Korean peninsula. If you look closely, it bordered a large-scale dungeon, Eiger Jungle, and Seoul. In reality, it was a separate dungeon. 30 years ago, the state united the Association of Hunters and made a plan for a complete cleaning of the dungeon. They gathered all the known hunters and held a briefing, during which none of them refused, although participation was completely voluntary. Preparing for such a large-scale raid took about a year, and astronomers and physicists were involved because the plan was bound to decrease. Eventually, there was an announcement that Mount Gravik, formerly Mount Ensan on the territory of South Korea, had been completely cleared of the dungeon. Everyone was jubilant because a complete clearing of the dungeon above rank A by world standards was a significant achievement. However, after that, The minds of most Koreans were occupied with joyful thoughts. There was more than one mountain peak on Mount Dravik. The mountain range itself was quite extensive, but how to use this terrain? Unexpectedly, Yute's words cut off the root of the dispute over the right to own land. One of the people, more specifically Yuzhang, proposed to build a school on this site because there had previously been a need for some kind of educational institution for hunters. For the systematic education of a huge number of gifted students, a space that wasn't easy to prepare was needed, so these plans were constantly postponed. At that time, the dungeon itself didn't have a master, but the real right of possession belonged to the hunters who risked their lives for the sake of clearing it. Not then, not now, only a few people knew about it, but if the hunter had made a significant contribution to the clearing operation, showing others by example not to sacrifice their right of possession, then today, the heroes' school simply wouldn't exist. Of course, it was Yamya, who also added that even if he didn't study there, he always wanted to visit at least once. I think many people wanted that because if they sold souvenirs there, they could earn a lot of money. He also wondered why they were leaving Seoul now, since the school wasn't located in the north. Salrom exhaled, and said that while she couldn't contact him, a lot had happened in the past month. Had he ever heard of Jay? Because after all, if not, then this is a well-known team for clearing dungeons. There were some fans among their friends, but they all died. Their shelter's lock broke, and apparently, there was a high-level danger monster nearby. At first glance, it looks terrible, but at the scene of the tragedy, medicines were found as well as the bodies of famous personalities. Ya Ryang thought that a global scandal had broken out, and Som confirmed his words. The public apologies started, even beginning with the Hunter Association, and public opinion about all organizations plummeted. After all, she would also scold the hunters if it had been before meeting him. In general, to calm this mood in society, the Hunter Association announced various innovative projects. The changed exam field is one of them, so she asked him about the Fang Maze, explaining that it was the second place completely cleared after Dravik Mountain, a dungeon that was ranked higher than A. At one time, the famous dragon Wazuka was located there. Right at that time, in the Chinsen Group laboratory in the underground forge, there was Zeke, who said that he barely managed to get a few barrels in just such a short time. Did their blacksmith drink it all? Zeke was in a bit of a pickle when the blacksmith slammed him with the reality that he shouldn't have made any noise at all. Apparently, it had been ages since he had drunk wine the right way, to the point where it wouldn't even touch his liver. The blacksmith was adamant that Zeke should steer clear of drinking altogether, even just a sip. They were talking about honey wine, a fierce brew that had 25 years of aging behind it. The blacksmith threw in that elves aren't exactly known for handling such potent stuff either. Then he asked why Zeke had even come to talk to him in the first place. Was there any news on Yan? In true Zeke fashion, he didn't directly say it was about him. Instead, he came asking about the Wazuki, claiming he heard that 20 years ago the association had reached out to the blacksmith. Of course, the blacksmith remembered that. They wanted to set him up a sweet spot for some hardcore training, but he brushed it off as nonsense and got booted out. Zeke was curious about why the blacksmith had given up on that idea, but the blacksmith was busy filling up another barrel with wine. He noted that dragons tend to get drawn to shiny things, each item igniting their obsession and desire to claim it. On that note, Wazuki was quite the favorite among dragon enthusiasts and certainly held his own against them. He spent a ton of effort making his lair intricate and confusing, borrowing tricks from titans, dwarves, and even humans and elves. People weren't exactly capable of handling such a monster. Zeke was on edge because he thought all the dangerous elements had been wiped out 2 decades ago by dwarves and elves. However, the blacksmith, still pouring his drink, said that the dwarves taken by the Basika must have numbered over 1,000. He had no clue how people managed to snag this dragon, but he was certain it wasn't caught inside the maze. It was likely someone managed to pull it off outside. If an organization was involved, then no tools would be spared, making it hard to catch the dragon, let alone not snuff it out over the last 20 years. The blacksmith believed that was just the beginning because whatever lay beneath the surface was likely far more dangerous. No one knew how the maze would react if someone dared step inside, but the blacksmith could tell from Zeke's expression that some fools probably did something reckless. He warned that if anything went down in that maze, they'd be sure to teach the intruders a lesson. Yet, there might be some clever soul out there who could conquer the dungeon instead. Meanwhile, Yan had finally wriggled out of the car and showed up at the training center in Fang, the former maze. Everyone was being told to gather their passes and contracts in Zone Bone, which had been spruced up to resemble a maze with varying difficulties. It seemed they had prepped everything ahead of time. Cram announced that this was the first run of such a test, leaving everyone in the dark on the details, although it was likely beneficial for our protagonist. Too many folks had shown up. At that moment, he grinned and complimented her cousin for a job well done, feeling the intense gaze of numerous ferocious stares, as if they were just itching to pounce. Roma glanced over at him with her head shaking. She knew Anisha would stir up trouble, but 20 people? That was pushing it. She couldn't even feel the heat of their eyes on her. Meanwhile, recognized that all his training hadn't been in vain. Over the past month, he had learned a lot, getting that twitchy feeling you get when someone's got you in their sights. It hit him like that disgusting sticky sensation you feel when you decide to crack a window open on a stifling summer day. The main character had risked his life in a high-difficulty dungeon for a whole month, so this experience had taught him important lessons, like how to dodge danger to avoid being under fire. But if he ever found himself in a tight spot, he knew he at least had to nod at everyone around, because no matter what, you can't show your opponent any weakness. He started radiating energy, making sure everyone in the vicinity couldn't help but notice. 50 minutes before the practical exam began in Fang's training center, folks were thanking each other for attending, emphasizing that their support made this memorable event possible. The director of the Hunter Association, ranked 12th in South Korea, gave a speech. He was followed by Lord Du-Su, the current headmaster of the high school, who lamented the overall craziness of this hasty plan. It's absurd to think this kind of nonsense will grab people's attention. They want authenticity, not just bizarre antics, he remarked. But given his position, he felt compelled to go along with what the majority wanted. He made it clear that, if anyone deserved thanks, it was the girl sitting right in front of him. She was the actual school principal. Despite holding the chairman's title at the hero school, she requested everyone to keep the peace, reminding them that all council members had been working on this for quite some time, and none of them were in favor of it, even if connections had played a role in the decision. Yet a bald man in a flashy red robe piped up, claiming they were taking things too seriously. This was just a supplementary exam for a few standout students. Why all the fuss? Naturally, he was set straight when reminded to sit down, unless he wanted to be reminded of his own glory days from 30 years ago, because there wasn't a single kid outside he could talk down to like that. The girl realized her words had made an impact and stated that if anyone stirred up more trouble, she was ready to respond accordingly. Tensions were simmering, with everyone expecting an explosion sooner or later. Then, out of the blue, one applicant walked in, completely disconnected from the ongoing tension. They all felt a unique aura and turned their attention to the doorway when the old man strolled out of his office and began chatting with another teacher. He urged this teacher to be prepared for criticism, claiming there wasn't a hunter in Korea who didn't realize that the chairman was like a lapdog. Yuri also asked teacher Kang if he felt that was rude, to which Kang acknowledged it but noted that the tonal delivery had crossed a line. Yet, the old man recognized the truth in it. Once you grasped the concept of power and influence, you'd want to use it as broadly as possible. But wasn't everyone going too far? After all, every school tries to attract graduates by inviting those students who only seek privileges, not through effort or ability, but through connections and wealth. The old man said that in a few years, there would definitely be no young hunters left the potential before them because they were quite satisfied with what was offered. In the future, they would become adults who only chase external benefits. The fish in a well can resist the storm, but only so much because they won't just keep swimming in that confined space. He even guessed that this time, there was only one request from the chairman. Everyone who comes to the exam today will either be relatives or acquaintances. At the same time, he asked Teacher King if he thought his words were too aggressive. After all, it's not enough for them to simply have kids who have left school. Many people are now trying to put pressure on those who remain. Does this mean he and the whole school mean nothing? Kang said that nothing would happen, and the old man supported him. So the old man decided to ask about the fact that none of them seemed confused, yet everyone felt the same eerie atmosphere. Of course, they laughed and thought it would unsightly for them. It wouldn't be fair to call him out. Was trying to figure things out, and it was likely he was acting this way on purpose. It turned out to be funny because the old man wanted that student to enroll, even though he, as director, might not allow it. But he hadn't felt the urge to work with a student in a long while. Just then, the students began discussing their exam topic, the search and transportation of treasure. To pass the exam, they needed to find a treasure hidden in a chest inside the dungeon and bring it back. All this was shown on a huge screen in the training center 30 minutes before the exam started. Our hero listened listened carefully because the rules were much simpler than he thought. He even assumed that it would be tough to calculate points or something like that. He also signed an agreement, acknowledging he might get some injuries, but the main thing was that he heard that even if everyone present successfully passes the tests, there would still be treasures left in the dungeon, and there was no limit on the number of those who could pass. But if a quarter of those present make it in, that's already over 100 people. The teacher concluded by saying there was still a lot to learn, but now they could go to the exam field, where their equipment was located. Yan was pissed he couldn't use his phone that he turned in, but he still knew he and Saram could meet up. It was at this moment that he noticed two heavily muscled men standing in front of some guy who was saying he had injured his leg and was walking slowly, having bumped into them by accident. The two guys were about to start hitting the other guy, so our protagonist stepped in and said they should behave properly and not molest each other. Of course, the guys felt superior because there were two of them and they were bigger, but as soon as Yan began lowering his aura, making it clear they were annoying him, he let everyone know he was currently restrained by the laws, but no one knew what could happen during the exam. In there, he could afford to push the limits a bit. Just then, after those guys left, our hero handed the book to that guy. Although he said he shouldn't have done this, he decided to help him and wished him luck on the exam. He noticed that the guy had an exam preparation book in hand, leading him to think he wasn't going to take it lightly. In front of them stood Pyod Jen, age 18, who had ranked second last year in the freshman assessment. By this point, everyone had arrived at the training center at the entrance to the maze, and there were 10 minutes left before the exam started. They asked everyone to follow instructions and head to their entrances, but the only thing our hero noticed was that everything looked more like a sci-fi movie. In front of them were strange comic-style capsules they had to enter. Once inside, they were instructed that the restored time would open the doors, and the exam would begin. These capsules were more like elevators, and each student received a tactical bracelet that notified them of the time, monitored their condition, and established their location. It was 5 seconds away from entering the maze, which was once called the Baskin Abyss. Many hunters had safety concerns about this place as a training field, but even they could not guess what hidden dangers lurked in this maze. No one could imagine it because the maze had a will of its own and deceived those trying to use it. Our hero felt something was off. The elevator was acting strange. Suddenly, the system blared that they had to evacuate the maze, that an emergency situation had occurred, and that the internal structure was changing. Finally, it turned out that the maze was rich enough to absorb those as prey, but all the people who had become prey didn't realize they had walked into the lair of the predator. This dragon maze without a master.